Hello. Welcome, boys and girls, men, women, everything in between, okay? Kings and queens. All y'all. Hello. How's it going? I hope you're doing good. I hope your week has been excellent. A lot going on, right? Tonight, I'm going to be having a discussion with a gentleman about birthright citizenship, its constitutionality, whether or not it's a desirable thing, and what effects, positive and negative, it has on this country, and what the Supreme Court is likely to rule. Hopefully, he gets here soon. I've sent him the link and all that, but we have a lot to go over. I've been reading the debate actually, between the senators who debated on whether or not to ratify the 14th Amendment. Just to kind of get an idea of what they thought and what their opinions were and what they define things as. It's illuminating, and we're going to get into it. Schwango says, are you having a debate or discussion, or is this your thoughts? Well, if the guy shows up, it's going to be like a semi-convo debate, okay? Because he disagrees with me on some points and not on others. It's a very kind of nuanced position he has, but it was interesting enough that I thought it was worth discussing, right? So if he shows up, and he's got about 2 minutes, I did go live a little early, so, there's that. If he doesn't, then I'm going to just kind of talk you through my argument here, gang, because I need content. And it's worth discussing, and I think it's worth having a rehash or a reaffirming of the case law and everything surrounding it. Because birthright citizenship, just a kind of spoiler alert, it was kind of the norm in antebellum America, in the pre-Civil War America. It wasn't till the Dred Scott case that it became kind of murky. But yeah, jus soli, as they say, was pretty much English common law, and America adopted, for the most part, most of English common law into its legal system. But we're gonna get into it, and we'll go through. Hopefully the guy gets here, so it's not just me monologuing, right? Wasn't the norm in like the whole of Americas, like North and South America? I can't speak to that, Mr. the Cringe. I can only speak to the United States of America. I cannot speak to all of North, South America, etc. But perhaps. I have been also looking at like arguments against birthright citizenship. Like, and when I say that, there's this legal theory, and I hesitate to call it even a legal theory because it's pretty weak, gang, where they claim that jurisdiction is referring to political jurisdiction rather than legal jurisdiction, but no such differentiation comes up during the debate. There are references to allegiance, but those are in reference specifically to Native Americans on reservations. And it's clarified that what they mean is legal jurisdiction. It's clarified in the debate, but we can get there when we go, right? And also further case law beforehand, case law after, says that this applies to sojourners or travelers, right? Not just immigrants, but anyone just visiting the country. There was a case law in 1844 where this was the case. We're going to get to that. Yeah, it's really hard to make an argument that makes sense unless you basically ignore a ton of precedent at the time, and you basically have to not read the debate of the 14th Amendment, right? Where the people who were debating whether or not to ratify it or not, you just have to not read that. You have to be really kind of go far afield to even make it make sense. But that's, par of the course. Okay, my guest is here. Let's bring him on and let's talk to him. Okay. Give me 1 sec. Okay, I think you're here. You're live, by the way. Welcome to the show.
Uh, okay. Let's see here. Is everything turned? I'll turn on my camera here.
Yeah, turn on your camera and we can see you.
Okay.
Okay, we can see you. We can hear you. I think everyone see and hear him, gang? Is
Hello, hello.
he here? Is he on? Is he there? I hope so. No one's saying no, but we'll give it a second.
hmm
So, I guess first of all, tell us who you are, what you do, kind of introduce yourself, and kind of give your thoughts on the whole birthright citizenship thing. Go ahead.
Give me 1 second. Man. Hopefully that. No, give me one. Sorry.
Okay,
Uh,
gang, technical difficulties. He'll get it done.
yeah. Give me. What is going on?
What are you trying to do here?
No, it's my phone is giving me like I have AirPods in, and so it does this like, hey, there's a message from blah 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 blah, and like, do you want to message him back? And I'm just like, okay. So anyway, sorry. Okay, I'm John. I'm on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how you prefer to it on this show. But it's the John Paul Hyde. It's just my name. I do a little bit of writing. I've done writing for American Dreaming, for Queer Majority. I blog here and there. I have a Substack, which is all on my Twitter. I'm also a massage therapist, but that's kind of irrelevant, but I am one. So, yeah. And then my position on the uh, birthright citizenship thing. I think it's a complicated issue. I think a lot of the people who have made arguments against it do so kind of in a flawed way. I think that the argument, for example, that it's about slavery isn't really true. I think that you can make a very solid case. My problem is that I think that if you go back to a way of looking at the Constitution and the way of thinking about these things, I think we have to go back to something like consent of the governed. I also think that it could not have been foreseen how things would have turned out, like the framing then and the framing now. From the beginning to the 14th Amendment to today is a lot different. Um, I do love immigration. I think we should. I'm like almost an open borders guy. So it's not like I'm trying to keep people out, but I think there are some humanitarian concerns. I think there are administrative problems. So I'm not coming at this from like a right word, get these like people out of the country, but more of a sort of consensual model of governance. I know there's a few things, a lot of things rattling around, but that's kind of like an overview, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, let's I guess start with where we kind of agree and what we agree on, right? So you would just agree to the fact that constitutionally the 14th Amendment does guarantee birthright citizenship to immigrants, whether they be legal or illegal. Is that something you would agree to?
Um, Not necessarily. So I think that's like when we talk about what I think in plain language, yes, I think that's true. But I would say that, for example, when you look at when the 14th Amendment was ratified, for example, like being an illegal immigrant wasn't even really a thing. You know what I mean? So that didn't come up until later. The idea that somebody being illegal, that their children specifically. Oh, okay. So the other part of it too is I think being a citizen is become a new thing as well. Like what that means if you read the Constitution is kind of ambiguous, I mean, yeah, it says like you live here for so long and you get to run for senator or whatever. Like, sure, we have those things. But like what it has become today, which has become a series of welfare rights, which are good. I'm not like against welfare rights, but that's become a thing. It means a different thing than it did then. And I don't know if that could have been foreseen. And jurisdiction is the big word. That's the one everyone goes on. And it has changed. Alaska, for example, when it was ratified, yes, those people became citizens, but that was like a part of the specific agreement of the state ratification or ceding. What's the word? It became a state, right? Whatever that word is.
It granted
What
statehood. I don't know how else to say it, right? But go
yeah,
ahead.
so yeah, there's a word for it. Man, annexation. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. So there's that. Like whether or not like there was a big argument whether like American Samoans and all these like territorial things. What if like we're at war with a country? Like the people coming in? There's all these different like ways that we've worked around jurisdiction. Uh, Sorry, I don't want to go on like too crazy long, so that I'll start there. Yeah.
Okay, so start there. So in plain language, you just to kind of summarize this, and you can tell me if I got it wrong. You would agree that in plain language it does, but that you don't think it was actually foreseen what that actually meant by the people who ratified it. They could not have foreseen what that would entail when it came to illegal immigration and things like that.
Right. It would not have been part of the perimeter of the things they were talking about because again, immigration was not the idea of illegal immigration wasn't in and of itself a thing. Like even being in the country, like just being in the country was not itself
Well,
seen.
the Chinese Exclusion Act wasn't put into place until I think almost 20 years after they
Right.
ratified the amendment. So the border control, such as it was, didn't really exist in the same way that it did. But I think that that speaks to my point, really, that they were specifically, when they were drawing the lines around what a citizen is, because that, if you read the debates that they had at the time, that was one of the things that they wanted answered, right? Like, what makes an American citizen? And this is what they were trying to kind of like draw a better border around because there was some question in that. Like, I think the people that the opponents to the 14th Amendment were questioning about was people like the Gypsies and the Chinese, right? And all those ne'er-do-wells, if you will. And they go on rants, if you read this, about the Gypsies stealing children and doing all these other crazy things. And they were worried that granting citizenship to the children of these people would be devastating and things like that. And so that's why a few people voted against the amendment. But
Can I
like,
ask you?
go ahead.
So, like, well, if I'm remembering correctly, that the Native Americans were not included in
Yeah.
the list specifically because they were seen to have and fealty and alliance with their tribes, right? There was like a question of like thing. And I think that argument at the time might have been a bit specious, just because like they were part of the jurisdiction, like they were part of the laws of America. They were definitely, there was a good argument
Well,
for it. If you were at the time, well, I guess what I'm asking is, if you were at the time, would you have included Native Americans in citizenship?
so the
If you were,
reason, and this is an interesting question, right? Because the reason they were excluded was debated at the time. There was some debate to add a addendum to it to exclude to say the same language that they had in the Civil Rights Act that they passed the same year, or I think 2 years prior. But the language that they were debating was whether to add Indians not taxed as one of the exclusions, excluding Indians not taxed. And there was a debate on why Indians should be included or discluded from this. And the topic of jurisdiction was what they were trying to kind of draw the bounds around. One of the senators at the time said that, of course, Indians should not be included, but that they didn't really need to add any clarifying language because everyone would understand what it meant. Hindsight being 2020, right? But basically, his argument was that because they weren't subject to our jurisdiction, right? They weren't. Like, if an Indian committed a crime against another Indian on U.S. soil, that wasn't our business. We didn't adjudicate that. And this was by treaty. We had a treaty with them until like 1871, right? Where there were a few crimes that, yes, we would, like murder, for example, but most crimes we just left to the tribes, right? Even if it occurred on our soil. I think that the word was used at the time was those wild plains Indians, right? There was debate, right, on whether or not jurisdiction meant allegiance or anyone subject to our laws in general. And it turns out that the senator who was arguing that Indians should be excluded because of X, Y, and Z ceded to the fact that, oh yes, any Indian that was under our jurisdiction, this would actually apply to. But because most of them aren't, we're gonna we're going to just say they're not, right? And again,
Mm.
case law in the future, like I think in Elk versus so and so in like 1884, adjudicated a little bit, but yeah, that was kind of the argument at the time is, well, who counts as being under our jurisdiction? And because we had a treaty relationship with the Indians, and because we couldn't really enforce our will upon them, and they were like a quasi-independent state, yeah, Indians did not count. It was a unique
Yeah.
relationship, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm asking, like, would personally, if you were in the debates, would you have wanted to count them? I
I
guess.
mean, look, I think that yes, but only because I understood. Like, it's hard to put myself in those shoes because I know what comes next. Like, a
Mhm.
few years after the ratification, they do away with the treaty, right? And they suddenly do subject Indians to the laws of our land, but they don't get actually citizenship till like 1924 or some shit, right?
Mm.
So I would include them knowing that eventually the reasons for excluding them would go away, like very shortly after this. But hindsight being 2020 and all, I don't know if not having that foreknowledge would have changed my mind. It's really hard for me to.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And like going a little bit to like citizenship and like even what that means as a thing. I mean, throughout history, like even just being a citizen has meant different. I mean, citizenship, for example, like doesn't mean particular rights. People might be citizens or under a certain kind of jurisdiction, but not be able to play the same games that
Yeah,
we play. The 14th Amendment, and the other thing is too is like I know this is kind of a fraught question, but like, what does it mean to be an American? You know what I mean? And so, like in the 14th Amendment, I think, especially before that, like in the 1700s, and early before the like antebellum period, before the Civil War, um, I don't think there was much. I mean, America was more of it was more about the state that you were in, than it was like we are an American. And like there were a lot of like European expats and things like that. There was like a collective idea there. And the 14th Amendment, the big thing it did was I don't know if I'm allowed to curse in here, but it was kind of like a hey, like quit, we're not doing the Civil War again. Shut the fuck up. We're not doing that. You're all citizens, it kind of tried to legally establish, hey, Americanism. And so, like, how do you think that's changed from then to now? And do you think that, like, does have a bearing on the debates we have about it?
I think that there are a group of people trying to change it. I don't think it's actually changed, though. I think that there is a movement within America to redefine what being an American is. And
Mm.
ironically, it's a very un-American idea of like blood and soil, right? Where they call themselves heritage Americans, right? But it's just antithetical to what the Constitution and what our history has kind of been. I think that you're exactly right. One of the arguments within the debate from the senator of California was that during the Civil War, one of the injustices that happened was that in California there were a lot of rebels, as the term that they used, right? That would become highwaymen that would go and kind of rob people who were traveling the roads of California and within the boundaries of California. And unfortunately, the laws at the time meant that Chinese immigrants and Chinese residents and things like that couldn't testify, right? Couldn't like testify to anything. They weren't counted as people in the court. And so if these rebels, these Southern rebels, robbed a migrant caravan or robbed, right, one of these Chinese caravan, unless there was a white person there to testify to it, they could just get away with it. And the senator makes an interesting point, like in this case, who has more allegiance to America? These Chinese people who are trying to rely on its laws, or these rebels who are breaking our laws? And I think that this kind of, to me, boils down to answer your question, what is an American? I think it's someone who values our laws, values our culture, values our way of life, and wants to kind of see it protected. And the people who don't and who want to fundamentally change it, right, I would consider less American. but that's me.
So I actually don't disagree with you at all. And so I think that there's kind of uh, a bit of it, not entirely false economy, because I forget there's Latin words. I'm not good at them, but there's, I think, Jus Soli is the birthright, and then is it De
Birth by soil,
Sanguine?
right? And then just
Yeah, it's by soil and by
sanguinis,
blood,
right?
Yeah, I wanted to sound fancy, but yeah, it's by soil by blood. And so I think that kind of goes to another point of thing is that I think that it's that somebody, for example, who, is born here but lives, from, some period of time, away from the country for, and then comes back, and doesn't, and they actually kind of like, so, okay, so I'll just write, I have ADHD, so it's like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so,
It's all good, man.
but
We're just having a conversation, so just
yeah. Yeah. So, I would say that that person isn't necessarily, an American, either in like that real sense, in the way that you're saying that, like, you're kind of part of our principles, education, etc. And there's this idea that's, I think they had it in France. I don't know if they still have it or not, but like, let's say that you are born in America in in one of these situations, where it's like, immigrant parents, kids born there, etc. And there's this idea that, okay, we can confer upon you retroactively citizenship once you've been here for a certain amount of years, maybe 18, maybe 50. We could, I think it's 18 in France, but it's, whatever age you want to do it. And that sort of, and you would allow them to have the same rights of due process, public schooling, all of those things. But there is a requirement to have the citizenship of naturalization as well. And that kind of goes to the Kim Wong Ark case specifically, or Wong Kim Ark, sorry, where part of one of the discrepancies of it were I believe his parents wanted to establish domesticity there. He had referred to himself as an American for years and years. So this wasn't like a birth tourism kind of deal. Like, that's essentially different too. And so, like, no, I don't, like, the Heritage America. Yeah, I don't think that you being from Europe or being white should be part of it. And I think that birthright citizenship almost can go into that idea again, like, oh, I happen to be born here even though I haven't been here for 30 years, I'm an American. It's like, well, are you really? You know what I mean? That's another problem as well.
I mean, well, there's a couple angles we could go here. I'll start
Yeah.
with this. Like, the idea of, right, being born here and why I think that should give you, right, some sort of right of protection by the state, right, by a citizenship. And because when you were born here, right, well, I'll just ask you this. Let me try it this way. Would the cops, if there was an immigrant here and they had a kid and the kid came under attack, or someone stole from the child, or someone attacked the child or was trying to hurt the child, would our legal system protect that child?
Are you asking me, like, in my hypothetical retractive citizenship world?
No, I'm
Are
talking
you
about now, today.
would a child, if somebody attacks an
Yeah,
immigrant
there's
child?
illegal immigrants, okay, are coming. They're illegal immigrants. They hopped the border, and they had a kid, and the kid was in the hospital, okay, 9 days old or whatever, right? 3 days old. And then the nurse tries to steal that child, okay, just tries to take it and run. And the cops see this. Would the cops stop that from happening?
If the nurse tries to steal the child?
The nurse wants to steal the child, raise it, like, sell it on the black market. I don't know, right?
Okay, so I have a feeling, I would say that they would, but I have a feeling you are going to tell me that they would not.
No, they
And I'm
would.
ready.
They would.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Shit,
I'm asking
hold on
this to
now.
kind of establish a thing. Like,
Okay.
they should. They would,
Hey,
and they should. Our legal system would protect that child, right? Now,
yes.
this is why that child, in a real sense, owes allegiance to the place it was born, because it is under the protection of the law of the place that it was born. And this, again, provides a kind of allegiance. And this was established, actually, in Inglis versus Trustees, okay? The trustees of Snailers Snug Harbor back in, 1844? And this was the argument given, right? That in order to fall under the jurisdiction and I'm going to quote here, two things usually concur to create citizenship. Okay? First, birth locally within the dominions of the sovereign. And secondly, birth within the protection and obedience, or in other words, with allegiance of the sovereign. That is, the party must be born within a place where the sovereign is at the time in full possession and exercise of his power. So we have to be able to enforce our laws there. That's why, we can't enforce our laws in Russia or in India or something like that. It has to be on American
Unless
soil.
we're invading a place, for
Sure.
example, and
Yeah.
then somebody it would be under our jurisdiction, but would not. Obviously, if we're, on the beaches of Cancun
Yeah,
or
it
whatever,
just wouldn't work, right?
there's discrepancies. Yeah.
And the party must also at his birth derive protection from, and consequently owe obedience or allegiance to the sovereign as such de facto. And this is American law. This is American precedent, right? And this is how jurisdiction was understood. And this is why even today, even if the parents have committed some crime, right? Whether that be being an illegal immigrant or otherwise, they are still, right? Their children specifically are still owe some sort of fealty or allegiance to the state on which they were born. And this is the kind of legal backing of why it matters.
No, and I can see that. I can see that point. And there's some level of allegiance. So a couple of things. I do think that there's a broader sort of human rights thing going on. So I think that we do have, and we consider this when people are not necessarily going to be okay, so let's say that you're on vacation or something in America, and somebody tries to steal your baby, we would still there's a basic human rights thing going on too. And so when you get to something like that, or even, so with people who are about to be deported, people who would not be conferred citizenship upon them are still owed due process, which was a big problem with us, bringing people in detention centers and things like that.
That's another reason why they fall under our jurisdiction, is because they have protection under our law. They can't just be killed willy-nilly. We can't hunt them in the streets for sport. Therefore, they are under our jurisdiction.
I can see what you're saying, but I think that the issue here is that two issues. One is that, and the first one is that I think there's a certain level of, being under jurisdiction of and being protected in the case of, human rights. We can go into the morality set up there, that they would be protected in either case, whether or not they would have that kind of allegiance. The other thing is too, and this is a bit more philosophical, but I would say that the person who is born here, and this automatic allegiance, automatic citizenship sort of thing, can the child reasonably consent to that situation? If citizenship is a kind of contract with the sovereign, with democratic, so whatever you want to put it, are they consenting to that? Are they consenting
is
to
citizenship a contract?
I would say it is. I would say in the
How
Lockean
so?
sense.
What contract did you sign when you were born?
What I would contract in a philosophical way, and I would go to if you ever read Locke's Treatise of Government, right?
Sure.
Treatise of Government, that the citizenship in a way is a kind of contract. No, it's not. I'm not signing a contract. It's a more social. I don't know if it's social contract, but it's a more inferred contract thing is what I'm getting at. Not we signed a contract.
I understand that I agree with you in that citizens should have a duty to the state and the state should have a duty to its citizens.
Mm-hmm.
But under our law, right, what duties does a citizen owe to the state? They're very, very few.
Yeah, that's interesting. That what is the duty an American has to the state? I think there are some.
There's a couple, right? I can think of you have to pay taxes, right? What else?
Yeah, I think the taxes is the big one. That's the major thing. But that goes to, again, it's more of a philosophical thing where you are still setting yourself up, at least as an identity as an American, and I think even the identity itself on a deeper level, not being able to consent to that, and also the consent of the people there. So you're saying if I'm saying, not I'm saying, but like, America saying, that like, okay, no, we don't want this person to be a citizen, really, they may or may not want to have that, it could come up with, I could see it coming up with other, not, I don't know if there's any examples of this, with connections with dual citizenship and things like that. So there are like practical things there, but I think there's like a fundamental sort of identity thing there
Yeah,
going
I
on.
do want to get to the practical considerations later, but I'm just trying
Yeah,
at this
we're
point to
practical.
kind
Yeah.
of go over the just basic, like, what do we think a citizen is and should be, and what do we think that the laws say a citizen is and should be. And $5, just real quick, $5 from Deej Nuts. Thank you for the $5. Says this isn't a good analogy, Wick. The same outcome would occur for an illegal immigrant baby born outside the U.S. but taken to an ER.
What do you
Yes
mean?
and no. Can you take it to an ER where? To an ER in the U.S.? Like, how can you name a time that that has happened where someone was born outside of the U.S. but then was rushed to the U.S. hospitals? I can't. I mean,
Yes.
I can imagine some edge case where they're like at the border of Mexico, right? And they are just like giving birth in a car there, and then they drive across the border and get to a hospital. But I can't think of.
It's possible. I mean, I guess that could happen. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know
I
any
don't think
specific.
that's very
But I mean, I
likely
think
to happen, but maybe.
we have to take the long view a little bit. It's like what is like could theoretically happen, I guess. But I don't know any specific cases of that, I'll be honest.
Sure, $5 from Alishness to say when Hawaii and Alaska became states, all of the people within those states became citizens. It's really that simple. I think one of the reasons it's important that we keep it that simple, and let me make like the positive non-legal case for it for a moment, right? Oh, I don't know if are you talking to
There's a
someone?
plane going by.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
No,
Yeah.
just legality aside, I think that one of the best parts of birthright citizenship is that it does make it very clear, very simple, and there's a very uh, strict lines and boundaries about it that you can't really fiddle with. Okay, you can't really debate with. There's no real wiggle room. When we weaken that, we open the door to changing legally who can and cannot be a citizen. Because if you are, because again, in the Constitution itself, there is nothing saying what a citizen is, as you mentioned before. So
Right.
the 14th Amendment was meant to fix that. If you start fiddling with that, what is to stop someone from fiddling even more with that and saying, well, okay, yeah, sure, maybe only legal immigrants who are here with a permanent resident can have that. Wait a minute. Why do we want even legal immigrants to have that? Why can't we just take it away from them too? And then expand it further and further and further out. Again, if we want to do that, there's a way to do that. It's called a constitutional amendment, but we make it very hard for a very specific reason. It's so that people can't easily decide who is and is not an American through political machinations and try to disenfranchise and basically denaturalize people that they do not want to be American.
No, I think that's a fair point. I and I can see where that the Constitution acts, not Constitution, but the way things are currently, it
Which
does
I would
provide.
argue the Constitution and the 14th Amendment does make it
Well,
currently, but go
and
on.
there's good precedent to say that, honestly. So, but I would say that, yeah, no, that's a good point. I think it is. Uh, I would say, to try to push back against that a little bit. Well, first of all, I think that when you have something like when there's some ambiguity involved in like how we interpret things, that we should generally, when we can, defer to the will of the people, the will of the people there. And I might not like the things that Congress decides or the people decide. I mean, I don't know if you agree. It seems like I would guess that you think my prescriptions would be more benign than maybe like a hardcore MAGA person, but the
Yeah,
hardcore
I
MAGA
don't
people are
think I want to be clear. I don't think you're out to deport all the Browns or something, right?
right.
But
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So, but I think there are also like things that could happen, within the birthright citizenship that aren't as clear that could also be set back. So, one of the things currently that's happening is like somebody is born here in the United States, they're a citizen, and then their parents are deported, and like how far do you want to take that where you have these like this possible separation of like these separation of families already happening all the time, and so when you have this like divided thing, that can become problematic. There are things where having this separation of parents and children, legally speaking, and physically speaking, as issues as well. So I'm not sure that either one couldn't provide, couldn't give us avenues that we would both find distasteful.
sure. $5 from D's Nuts to say of the developed Western world, only two nations have unrestricted birthright citizenship. You could have clear lines on who is a citizen without BRC. I would, to answer to that, I would point to the issues that Europe is having as evidence that it would probably be a better idea if they had more kind of clear lines on things. And one of the problems, like Germany, for example, changed its law on birthright citizenship in 2000, I believe.
It did, yeah.
But basically, they made it so that they didn't have birthright citizenship before, but they changed it so that they did to everyone born after a certain date. So anyone born in Germany after, I think it was January 1st, 2000, I could be wrong on the exact date there, did receive birthright citizenship. And we can measure the effects of that and see how did it improve their country, did it make it better there, and things like that. And we could see when it comes to assimilation, the children who the assimilation to culture is what I'm talking about here. The children who were born with birthright citizenship assimilated better than the children who prior to that had been born just didn't assimilate as well. And so we could see a notable it's not a huge improvement, but it's a notable improvement in assimilation from allowing birthright citizenship. So if our goal,
Yeah.
right, is to assimilate people who come to our country into our culture, we have evidence that birthright citizenship aids that process.
So okay, so going back to and well, it kind of going back to we were talking about in both practical and theoretical terms, like what citizenship means. So what it means in Germany, what the demands are based on somebody who is a citizen, for example, could be different. I don't know that much about Germany and their specific laws.
Sure.
I'll be honest with
Yeah,
you.
yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine, yeah.
Right. So, but the question is like, and this is a point that I've seen a couple of times that like whether or not being a citizen, is part of cultural assimilation. That it like does it really matter to people whether you are a citizen officially or not, and that would be a big thing. Like you could argue if the answer is yes, yeah, like okay, like citizenship does kind of matter, but if it doesn't matter as much, if it's more about like just the services that you get and how you're in society and all those things, and all those rights, then it wouldn't necessarily matter as much. And I think going back to your thing is like, well, what are the demands placed on a citizen specifically? I think it would have to do with what are those demands? Like, what are the like practical differences? And because you're right that there aren't a lot of like super practical differences, in terms of
Not of
citizenship duty.
demands, but when it comes to protections, that's where there's a huge difference in between a citizen and a
I
non-citizen.
agree,
Yeah,
but if those protections, if we do have protections that are established, even for people who are not officially citizens, then that would become less so. So it seems to hinge on like how much practical difference there is between somebody being a citizen, especially in childhood,
sure.
versus not being a citizen.
Well, I
And that
think
could
we
be
could see the differences in America specifically between someone who is a citizen and someone who is not. I think that the people who are not citizens that are even here legally under visas, student visas, to see how they are treated by this administration versus the people who are citizens, it's night and day. I would refer you to the cases where they were, if you recall, they were basically deporting students who are here legally, right? For having views that went against this administration. They couldn't do that to the citizens, right? But they could legally, unfortunately, to the well, mostly legally. It's fraught, right? But there was a higher chance of them doing it towards someone who is on a student visa. And I think that by creating this kind of this two-tier system of birth and citizenship here in America, it will just exacerbate that. And we'll have like kind of this like, I don't know, almost like parallel society in America where you have the citizens who were born or the people who were born to citizens and get citizenship, and then the people who were born here. Again, no fault of their own. You don't choose where you're born, but they don't receive any of the protections that someone who was born next to them might. And it just creates problems.
No, and no, I can see that being the case, but I would, again, going back to an earlier thing I was talking about, is like the sort of naturalization process and things like that. It's like, why should it be the case that somebody, again, who hasn't lived here, his parents haven't lived there, who for years and years, who doesn't have, because you kind of in your thing there, you kind of talk about people who have established themselves as Americans, or Americans in ways that you and I both would agree they are, but that's not every case. And I would go back to my sort of uh, why not have a system where you have these protections, and then the citizenship can be conferred on you at a later date when you can decide and
Yeah.
you've lived here for a certain amount of time.
Well, the reason I would give you, or the argument I would give you here, is because it's much harder to change the existing structure than it would be to simply to reinforce the existing structure. So if you wanted a structure where we didn't provide birthright citizenship, but we had stronger protections for people who were visiting and non-citizens and immigrants and things like that, that's possible, right? Obviously, we could make those changes, but I think I would posit to you that it's much easier to simply reinforce, and I hope SCOTUS does this when they make their decision. It should be an 8-1, 9-0 decision against Trump here, right? It should, but yeah, stranger things have happened. We should simply reinforce that, hey, anyone who's born here on our soil, under our jurisdiction, gets the protection of citizenship. And it's clear, it's simple, and we don't have to change any laws, right? We don't have to change anything, and we can simply reinforce that. Whereas if we wanted to do it your way, there would be a lot of bickering over, okay, well, what protections should we provide? What, carve out should we give? And it would be a whole bureaucratic kind of mess. And, yeah, I just think it's much easier. If we want people, and I assume you do, if we want the people who are in our country to be protected from harm to various degrees, right? We would want to provide them with citizenship if we can. Because I'll be real with you, just real quick. Like, I want more people to become American.
Me too. I agree with you.
I think that is a great thing. I have no problem kicking out violent illegal immigrants or people who break our laws, who are visiting and things like that. Deport them all is what I say, right? But a baby hasn't done shit, right? Like a kid, a 6-year-old, right, hasn't done shit. I want to give more paths to citizenship for these people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves on our soil. Birthright citizenship allows for that, right? And it gives people a reason to want to come here. I think that we should have 1 billion Americans, okay? Right? I think that we should have more of us. And that's what makes our country great, is being able to take the best and brightest from literally all over the world and bring them to our soil and say, you are now American.
No, and I don't even disagree with your at least the idea of we should have more Americans. I like your what is it, Matt Iglesias, a billion Americans. Yeah,
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 that's where I got the a billion
yeah, yeah,
Americans. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. No, and I don't even disagree with that necessarily. I yeah, I see where you're coming from. The other issue, I think, from well, okay, so first of all, I would say that there is a matter of it does cost money to have things that we like, things like welfare and things like that. And yes, children are an investment in the future. They are 18 years later or whatever, you get a job. I don't know, all those things. But they are a cost. And so, like, do you think there should be some kind of limiting principle, a sort of a categorical imperative principle where we say, like, at a certain point, like, we can't just endlessly have like
sure.
new
Yeah,
children. Right.
there is a limit, but currently we are below replacement rate in this
I
country.
now, yes, I
Yes.
agree with that.
So
So
I would be happy to if that were not the case and we were simply have overcrowding everywhere in this country, to relook at that. But that is not the state we find ourselves in. We find ourselves in need of people, to do work in this country and to, as you said, it's an investment in this country. $5 from D's Nuts says this, and thank you for the $5.
every,
I know he keeps
just,
giving me money, and I love it. Keep doing it. More people should. Okay. Says, why can't the standard just be having a U.S. citizen parent? Then we don't end up with the problem of deporting parents of anchor babies. Because I think that, again, well, first of all, because it's a constitutional right. Because it's clear in the Constitution that we want everyone who's born in the U.S. Under our jurisdiction to be a citizen. We do make 3 carve-outs, right? Or 2 now, because 1924 we changed it, right? But there's 2 carve-outs to that, and that is children of ambassadors, diplomats, etc., right? Foreign ministers, etc., and invading armies. So if you were like, if China invaded us and they had kids on our soil, it wouldn't count because, well, we can't hold them subject to our jurisdiction because they're invading us. They're not under our laws in a real way, right? So those are the carve outs we have. I think just limiting it to U.S. citizenship of at least one parent, I mean, that's just not how it is. And I think changing it now is not the way forward.
yeah. Well, okay. So there's a couple of things there. Uh, One that even because like we do have the by blood citizenship if your parent is abroad and you have a kid, and I think
Yeah, but that's
I
not
don't
by, just to be clear, that's not by constitutional amendment. That's by
no,
law. So it's not in
but
the Constitution. It's a legislative thing. So that, if Trump wanted to end that, he could, frankly. But
so just to kind of finish the point, what's interesting is I think that is I believe I don't know if it's still the case, but for at least last time I checked, it's matrilineal. And so like it's if your mother is an American, but if your father isn't, that gets
I'd have to
confusing.
look, but I'm pretty sure it's either if you can prove, but it's much easier to prove if who your mom was and who your dad was, right?
Yeah, but okay, so this is the thing. I believe it was Australia. I don't know if they actually went through with it or if they just floated this idea. But they actually, when you talk about, because we're talking about like separation of parents and things like that, that you would almost go even harder on birthright, where the parents of the children would also be conferred retroactive birthright citizenship. Would you be in favor of something like that? Would you go that far
Like
with it?
a retroactive birthright citizenship?
Yeah, so like let's say
No.
you're immigrant, you're on a visa, you have a kid. Like not only would your kid get citizenship, but like you would also
No,
get
I
citizenship.
don't think that would be wise. Yeah, I don't think that would be wise.
Yeah. Okay. So
I like how it is now, honestly. I think that the way it is now is probably, for America at least, the best of all the options that we have. A lot of people in chat, just real quick, a lot of people in chat are saying you can read the transcripts for the debate online Yes, I did. And to claim it was all about slavery, you haven't read the transcripts online. I just want
No,
to be
and
clear.
I'm not making that claim at all.
I know
To be
you aren't, but a few people in my chat, and I'm sorry, I wanted to respond to them. Like, we can bring it up even. Like, I can show you guys like the transcripts. They're all out there. You can read it. And here, let me share my screen if you want to click on it real quick.
right. Oh, just
Yeah,
hit
I
watch.
mean,
Is
yeah,
that what I
it's
do?
well, you
Okay,
can just watch
I see
screen.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can see the arguments, and there's thousands of pages, right? But not all of them are about the 14th Amendment, right? But you can read these, and they are absolutely not about, right? Well, just this one, like, Trumbull and Johnson are arguing about whether Indians fall under our jurisdiction, right? And they're arguing about it. And Mr. Johnson says basically that we punish murder committed within the territorial limits in which the tribes are to be found. I think we punish the crime of murder committed by one Indian upon another Indian. I think my friend from Illinois is wrong in supposing that it is not done. And Mr. Trumbull responds, not except where it is done under special provision, i.e., not with the wild Indians of the plains. Again, this showcases that sometimes they were in our territory, but we did not even punish murder, right? Except for where like special provision and it was under treaty, right? Like, it was crazy. So Mr. Johnson says, yeah, the ones who by special provision of legislation that I understand, I'm referring to that. Mr. Trumbull responds, we propose to make citizens of those brought under our jurisdiction in that way. Nobody objects to that, I reckon. So again, just to the people in chat, not to you, I know. This gives the lie to anyone who's saying that is anything other than legal jurisdiction. Trimble, again, anyone under our legal jurisdiction, they are proposing to make citizens, right? And nobody objects to that, I reckon. Now, Mr. Johnson did, and he later votes against it, right? But they go through it. I think he votes against it, right? But they go through it and they argue back and forth. But it was a common understanding. Anyway, sorry about that. I just wanted to demonstrate.
Can I kind of add a little bit to
Sure.
what you're saying
Go ahead.
here? The reason why somebody was a citizen, though it didn't have to do with slavery. Okay. So it didn't have to do with slavery. It goes back to English common law, and in fact, it was
Yes.
a natural law interpretation. I believe in was it the 15 or 1600s that this became a
1600s.
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a natural law case of allegiance under birthright. So no, this was not this was certainly not a specific slavery kind of thing.
Yeah, it just was.
No.
That's just not true. And we can read the transcripts, and I encourage you to do so. You can find them online. You can look at the congressional transcripts of the debate on ratifying the 14th Amendment. I should probably have put a link to that in the description, but whatever. And you can just read it for yourself. It's pretty clear. It's long,
Right,
and the
and so
formatting, as you can say, is a little weird, but you can read it. So,
yeah.
but
So
anyway, sorry for that tangent. But go on.
that was good. No. Okay, but I think one of the things that was okay. So there a couple things. I am not and we can talk about this a little bit. I think that these arguments over like specific debates, during that time, can be useful in trying to establish like what the people at the time thought. And I think that can be important, but I'm not an originalist. And I think originalism has its problems, and I don't think people throughout history in the Supreme Court saw themselves as originalist either. And we can kind of get into these sort of specific things. What I would say as far as the allegiance and everything goes, that's sort of an ascriptive, or you are bound by duty to this thing. And I would go back to the idea that America, did in some ways try to get away from that and wanted to be a more consensualist system. And I think that broader framework, that broader interest, the sort of we the people collectively does make a difference and does bring us apart from, or distinguishes us a little bit, at least philosophically, from the ascriptive allegiance model.
Yeah, this is why we have the ability to expatriate. And what that is you can simply renounce your citizenship. There's no law against that. This is something that is granted freely to you because, as you said, we have consent to the governed, right, as a kind of a like our principle. So if you no longer consent to be an American citizen, you can expatriate. You can say, I'm no longer an American citizen. I don't know if there's an official process to that, right? But that is allowed. So a sovereign, someone who is a subject of a monarchy, isn't necessarily allowed or to do that, right? You can't just say, I'm expatriating. I don't want to be subject to the laws of this land anymore, England in the 1700s. You couldn't just renounce your English ethnicity, right? You couldn't do that. But in America, we can. And that's a big difference between the two governing systems. Go ahead.
No, and that's a good point. I would say that, okay, so, and I arguing, I have arguments about this, but I would say that the before you are 18, I assume expatriation would be done independently after the age of majority. I could be wrong about
I don't
that,
know
but
the specific.
I'm gonna say that's probably true. You know, so it is not the case. For example, we are, in fact, with birthright citizenship, we are no, we are saying that we have more authority over the allegiance to America that a person has than a person's parents do, right? So if a parent says like, "Hey, I don't want to be an American anymore. I don't want my child to be an American. I don't want to, for whatever reason." It's hard to imagine, but somebody might, it could be like they would not be allowed that. So we are kind of still, I would go to the parental point. We are superseding the parents of the children, at least legally speaking.
I
So I think the
mean,
consent does run into that as well.
but we do that all the time, right? We do not allow parents to do certain things to their children or with their children. There are certain decisions we do not allow parents to make for their children. Obviously the big ones are like any sexual stuff, right? We just don't allow that. We just say no. We it doesn't matter if you think it's best for your children to start sleeping with adults at age 8. We're not going to allow that to happen. We also have laws restricting how you can discipline. A parent can discipline their child, things like that. So there are restrictions that we place between a parent and a child. And I think this is one of them. I don't think and I don't believe that a parent can renounce citizenship for their child. I don't think that that's allowed. I think that you have to do it yourself. And I do think you have to be I'm not sure if it's the age of
It's not
majority
allowed.
or
To
not.
be clear, it is not allowed. So, but if we're to kind of be based on the rule, and that is kind of part of it. I don't know. Okay, so we're talking about. I think the term is in toto parentis, or an absence of the parent. And one of the big arguments is should a parent decide? I live in Texas. We just voted on this. Where whether or not children can a parent can I don't want my kids vaccinated, blah blah blah. But the things you're mentioning, or having sex with an adult, all these things, there is a clear sort of human interest, a clear sort of human right thing going on there. And I don't know if would you put that on the same tier of absolutely not, hell the fuck no, you cannot do that to your children. What's
I
wrong with
don't
you?
think that
You know.
a parent should be able to, for their children, renounce their citizenship. I don't think that should be a thing. I wouldn't put it obviously on the same tier as any kind of sexual crime, obviously, but I do think it is something that I would not allow. I would not allow a parent to say, I don't want my kid to be a citizen of this country anymore. I think that should be left up to the child.
So let's say, for example, you have, and again, I don't know if there's any case where this is, but it's happened with other countries. For example, you have a country where, I think it's the case in the Middle East. If you've ever even been to Israel, that you can't even visit certain Middle Eastern countries. They're pretty hardcore about it. And so we could have a case where a country decides, that if you are an American citizen in any way, that you cannot be a citizen here. And you have somebody, let's say you grew up in one of these countries, wants to move back to their country, and they would like to take their children with them. And we run into an issue where they might be blocked from doing so because of the birthright citizenship thing. Do you think there should be any kind of dispensation for that, for example?
Can you reframe that for me, please? Just
Okay.
recontextualize
Yeah.
it for
So
me, please. Just
let
so
me
I
try to
understand.
simplify it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you have somebody who, a family who said that they're from a country, right, another country, and that country decides, These people move to, America. They have a kid, what they have a kid. They don't have citizenship in America. The child does. One of these situations.
Okay.
The country that they want to move back to, that they're originally from, the family has decided that they will not allow residency, citizenship, anything else from somebody who is an American citizen. And the corollary to that, or, something that's happened, it happens in the Middle East, where, for example, if you've ever even visited Israel, you are not allowed to visit a certain number of countries. I think it's Afghanistan's one of them. There's a few, right? So in a situation like that, we could see where a parent might want to, or a family might want to move back to the country that they originally from. Not because we're kicking them out, just because they want to move
Sure,
there.
sure.
And they are disallowed because they cannot take away the citizenship of the child. They could not move their child to their home country. Do you think there should be some kind of dispensation
I
for
don't think
that?
so. I don't think we should base our laws and things like that over such a situation where if a family who wants to move their children into a country that does not allow, for whatever reason, American citizens. Um,
Mhm.
I can't think of a country that does that, honestly. I think
Not
that,
they do it with in the Middle East. They do if you are a citizen. I think it's with Israel and other Middle
yeah,
Eastern
but
countries.
not with
Anyone that,
America, right? Like, so
yeah, not with us, right?
but
But it's
that's because they don't like Jews. Let's be clear. Like, that's a anti-Semitic thing, and I don't think we should be basing our laws to allow for anti-Semitism in that regard. I think that, like, for under that circumstances, and I would feel for the parents, sure, but again, I think it's too important of a decision to make for anyone to make for someone except for the person themselves. The person themselves should be the one to have to um, renounce their citizenship. Now, keep in mind, I would be open to arguments of allowing this for like someone who's a little younger than 18, right? Like 16 or something like that. But I think the age of majority is probably a good line, just
it's
generally on
fine.
that.
Yeah, if we're gonna do that, yeah. No, I generally speaking, I think the age of majority is a good line in the sand if we're gonna go that route. Shit, I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. Let me try to bring it back. Um, sorry, can you can we where were we?
Sure. Okay.
Give me
We're talking.
yeah.
I think we've gone a little far afield, honestly, but we're talking about like the benefits and penalties to birthright citizenship and why it should be whether it's something that we want and something that we don't want. So we've kind of gone beyond the established is it constitutional framework, which I think we both ceded to that it is.
Mhm.
Now the question becomes: is it something that is beneficial not only to the country but to the people itself? Like, and I think we were talking about what penalties or what cons you would have towards automatically receiving citizenship in a country simply by being born there.
So I would say, okay, so to go back a little bit, I would say that there is some ambiguity as far as like what would be, again, I would kind of back an earlier thing, because of the changing ways that what a citizen is, immigration, et cetera, et cetera. And we can look back at court cases where even if something is in the Constitution, in a sort of a plain language way, that the courts have decided in various ways that, what, we are going to make a Supreme Court decision, and we're going to say like, hey, there's a larger principle. So the big example of this is, and one we both probably agree was a good decision, was like Brown v. Board of Education
Sure.
kind of stuff. Anything like segregation related, uh, isn't really in the Constitution. But there's a broader principle argument and it's trying to figure out, is there, and there's smaller cases like, can Congress, one of them is like, can Congress, establish environmental stuff, but that's the big one, is that, and I would say, for example, with the Brown v. Board of Education, segregation rules, slavery itself, all these different things, that at the time of the drafting of the Constitution, we had this idea of all men are created equal, right? And that's like a guiding principle. But like what all men meant in the 1700s, I'm going to be very careful about this, okay? So like bear with me, okay? I would say that prior to probably the origin of species, of Darwin, which I think is 1800s, right? People can make a plausible argument that there wasn't the same, origin of a European and a black person. And it wasn't
I
until
mean,
we
they
understood
made these arguments to
they
justify
did.
slavery and things like that. Yes,
Absolutely.
this is something
Okay,
that they did
so
actually argue. Yep.
yes. So, but today, and prior to literally today, but we now know that there is a common ancestor, that we are all, the same people. And so then we can look at the principle that was established, which is that all men are created equal, and say that, because of that, it must be the case that, segregation is wrong, that there is equal, that slavery is wrong, first of all, you know and so we can look at these sort of larger principles, and we can look at, again, court cases. So again, court case, it being in the Constitution or not specifically, and what that means, I don't think is always the best grounding for whether or
Sure,
not a thing should
you
become.
can make an argument that whether or not something is constitutional does not matter. What we should push for is X, Y, or Z, and that's why we have in our Constitution a way to change the Constitution. Right? We can make an amendment and call a constitutional Congress, and we can change um, anything really, pretty much. My question or my concern about what Trump is doing here is he's trying to bypass that process. And he, instead of going through the making the legwork to persuade enough people in order to get a constitutional amendment passed, he is trying to use the courts and bypass that process and change a core fundamental constitutional right that we have in this country in order to fulfill um, what his constituency wants. And I think that it
Yeah,
is
and I think
very, very dangerous precedent to do that.
no, and I can see what you're saying there. But no, but I mean, again, like with segregation, I don't believe that Brown v. Board of Education was a constitutional
It
amendment.
wasn't.
If I'm not mistaken, it
And
was an
this is what I'm saying. A
interpretation.
lot of these segregation stuff, they weren't in the Constitution. It was something that they didn't need a constitutional amendment to change. So the courts and legislation are the appropriate venue for that. If you want to change a law, you can use legislation to do so, or you can say, hey, this law is unconstitutional and we can change it through the court system. That's fine. But when you want to amend a constitutional right, if you want to change a constitutional right, I don't think that the courts are the appropriate venue to do that.
No, and I see what you're saying there, but I would say, for example, I forget the court case, but it was like, what is like? So there's like enumerated powers of like Congress, for example, right? Um, and there have been questions that have court cases that have come up where Congress has been allowed to go beyond their enumerated powers, even if explicitly against the amendment itself. So for example, like the necessary and proper clause, like we have like changed the meaning from the originalist sense of what is necessary, meaning like logically necessary, to what is necessary in the sense of like what is like needed, so things like that. There are, things that have been done around language with, as far as, these changes have gone. So I don't think it's always an amendment that needs to happen to recontextualize the language. And specifically, if you look, and you're talking about like the invading armies and things like that, like what is the core principle of why, for example, somebody who is part of an invading army, that their citizenship their children would not gain citizenship.
It's because
And I think there's no,
oh, go
go
ahead
ahead.
and make
Sorry.
your
No,
argument. But there's an answer to your question. But make your argument first, and then I'll answer.
so, right, and so there is a way that it's contextualized then, but there is a recontextualizing that I think that is plausible. And it's that the people there in the first place are in contradiction to the will of the sovereign even being there in the first place. There is an unwanted presence happening. And again, that would be a new interpretation, but we have done these new recontextualizations and new interpretations before. Like that there is precedent for that specifically.
I mean, we have. So, for example, Let's talk First Amendment for a moment. Um, what we
Yeah.
consider speech has evolved in the world. Like this, like cell phones, websites, what we're doing now, they didn't exist back in the Constitution, right? When they were framing the First Amendment, right? But we can decide whether or not the First Amendment covers new tech and new concepts and new things, right? We've decided, and I think rightly so, that web pages and social media, etc., are all covered under the First Amendment, right? The Second Amendment, we can go to there. Like, automatic rifles didn't exist during the constitutional where they uh, ratified the Second Amendment. It just didn't exist. It wasn't a concept that they had. But we have decided, and I think rightly so, that automatic rifles are covered under the Second Amendment. So, well, yes, things change, wording changes, etc. I do think that the idea of looking at what is intended overall by the amendment is probably a good idea. And I think that, again, if we look at the discussions that the people who were ratifying birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment, had, we can see that they were intending to include everyone, all classes of persons, and they say this several times, except three different groups: Indians, invading armies, and sons and daughters of diplomats and shit like that. Other than those, they said everyone else in our country that is born on our soil gets citizenship. They weren't, I mean, like, if circumstances have changed so that the country no longer wants that and it's no longer desirable, okay, but then you have to amend the Constitution.
I would say that I don't think the reframing would be all that problematic. Um, I would I would say too that like okay, so let me ask you kind of a kind of a moral framework question. Do you think that somebody who is, goes to America. Okay, do you think birth tourism on the side of the birth tour? That's there's probably a better way to put that because birth tourism kind of gives it a negative connotation that I don't want to poison the well. But like, so somebody who is having a child specifically to get to get that child's citizenship for no other reason to get the benefits and to leave whatever.
Yeah, I don't think
Do
there's
you
anything
think?
immoral about that, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I was gonna say, do you think that there's anything immoral about that?
No, why would there be? I think that wanting a better life for your child is something that everyone should want. And if you think that having your child be a U.S. citizen would make a better life for their child, which it would in almost all cases, um, yeah, I see
Oh
no
yeah.
moral objection to that on the like I would not judge a parent for wanting that for their child.
No, on a basic level, I can see that point, but where I would see it as moral is if it is done in contradiction to the consent of the people here and or done under false pretenses. So if somebody comes in, and kind of makes the overtures of saying, "Hey, I want to be, part of America," blah blah blah, has the kid, leaves. I think that there is not a baseline immoral thing, but rather an immoral um, denial of consent.
I'll
There's
just kind of I kind of we can
there's
skip past this part real quick because I think that any argument against this would be from a pragmatic nature, right? Like, while it might not be immoral, right? One could argue that practically it would be problematic to allow this. That is an argument you can make, but I don't think that the evidence supports that argument. But it's a fair argument to make, right?
No, I think no, I think that the problem is not like the pragmatic point, but literally the concept of consent. If you're coming in doing this thing, that is not under the consent of the people here, and doing it under false pretenses. I think that there's an argument that is, contrary to what we see as consent, and consent has also a huge history of what that means as well. But like, yeah, I think that would be there. That does seem to me just baseline problematic in some way.
Well, in that case, under that framework, giving citizenship even to someone who is born by U.S. citizens would be problematic, would it not? Because
What do you
the
mean?
baby can't consent to that.
That is an interesting point. And I
So, I
actually kind
mean,
of thought
under
about
that
this.
framework,
Yeah,
like it's
that's
just
yeah.
immoral to give anyone citizenship when they're born, which is, I just,
I know.
it's
I
a,
thought
it's
about
not an
that.
argument that
That's
it's not an argument that like, that
No, this is
really
an argument
moves
that's
me.
that's come up. This is actually is a, and if you go, this is a bit far afield, but yeah, this argument has come up that any citizenship at all to anybody, even a born person, that's
Yeah, that's
conferred
silly.
automatically, is problematic.
I reject that kind of absolute consentism. I just do.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I could make like the anarchist point. No, I think that like again, you back to this, going back to something that you said, where there are times, that pragmaticism would eventually have to override consent. Like that is like, sure, like that would be a pretty far-reaching thing to try to do. I would agree. I would think, okay, so to go to like the practical things, like kind of so one of the things I've been thinking about, it's kind of been jostling around in my head. So one of the issues that we have with border enforcement, I, people come. So if somebody comes in and they're just like doing their job, they're like being a good guy, good lady, whatever, there's not really any, to me, any practical reason to like deport them. Honestly, I just pragmatically speaking, like there's not any, thing there. The only risk I would say happens is them having children and then having to think that. And you could say it's not a risk, and say it's
well,
an
hold on.
investment at the
Just,
time.
just so I can be clear, your objection to illegal immigration is specifically that they'll have
Mhm.
kids and they'll automatically become citizens, and you don't think that other than
Yes.
that risk, that nothing about illegal immigration really is a problem.
Not specifically. I would say that there are issues like if somebody's like committing crimes, for example, then
Well,
like
sure,
yeah,
but
obviously,
that's a
yeah,
problem no matter who's doing it, right? Like,
right. Yes. So the point I'm trying to make here is, but I think that is and you can run into other. I'm sure maybe you can make some arguments that there are more issues in this, but like I think that's like if somebody comes in and they're not causing any problems and they're fucking just trying to get a job, trying to do their thing, hooray! Like I love that. The only one of the issues there is the risk of them having kids because those kids are given
okay, what is the harm in your opinion of a someone who is an illegal immigrant or even a legal visa holder, right? Having a child in the United States and that child becoming a citizen by birth. What harm happens? How are you hurt? How am I hurt? How is the country hurt?
So I think the issue is that it's the harm goes to one. I don't think we can have, and right now this isn't a problem, but I could see this being a future problem. That there is a level that there is a limiting principle where you cannot have like constant new people and constant welfare things like that we might like at least given the time. I think that there are issues with mixed families and how we deal with those and all those things. But I would say that, and again, going back to, and whether or not we believe there's a pragmatic harm there, I think that, and this is, we live in a democracy. So, like, I think even the perception of harm by the people does, in and of itself, matter. So you have, so my point, so just to kind of wrap it up a little bit here, that if you didn't have that, there would be far less argument for having these things like ICE raids, so having these like mass, deportations, enforcement, et cetera, because somebody just existing in the country would not, them having a kid, there wouldn't be that risk. And if there's not that risk there, if they're just like doing their thing, like what I would ask you, like, do you think there's harm in and of themselves, in and of itself, of them
I
just being there? And it's
I
hard
don't
for me to
I
find one.
don't I don't think that there is harm done by birthright citizenship, not in any meaningful sense. I do not also think that if we revoked or amended and removed birthright citizenship, I don't think that the people who are crying for deportation now, or remigration as they call it, I don't think that you're going to, not a single one of those people are going to stop calling for that. That is not their problem with immigration. In fact, you're the only person who I've ever heard, and I'm not trying to be like silly here, right? But you're literally the only person I have ever heard whose only problem with illegal immigration is that they might have kids here. Like everyone else that I've talked to about illegal immigration, like will say that, well, they're taking jobs, they're taking up welfare from the system, etc. Right? And whether they're right or wrong about that, they have their reasons, and they give those reasons. I've never heard someone say the only problem with illegal immigration is the fact that they might have kids.
No, I think that would be and that's a good point. So one of the things I should probably, I've conceded before in this discussion, and I'll concede again, that my issues and my theoretical framing is entirely different. Not entirely. This is different. It's different than like the people that are actually trying to do this and what their goals are. Like that is a very important aspect of this, and it makes me a little bit, less hard line in kind of the discussion in the first place, because you're right. Like, it's not like me making an argument that has to do with like the pragmatism of like having like welfare functions and things like that for children specifically. Yes, that is, we are dealing with people specifically who really just want to get rid of as many people as possible. And that is an important consideration here. There are two different worlds happening. I'm making a sort of a pragmatic argument based on the interests in where we could go in the
Yeah, I
future.
just don't see
It is different.
the.
It's fundamentally different.
Yeah, I
I
understand.
agree.
I just don't see the like pragmatic harm of birthright citizenship. I don't think that it creates any kind of challenge that is making us worse off as a country. If anything, right? As we said before, we are below replacement rate in this country.
Mhm.
That's a bad thing. We need more citizens. We need more people in here. And I think birthright citizenship helps with that. It doesn't solve the problem, but it really does help. So I'm just really curious, and maybe people in chat can give me examples. But what are some
Mhm.
examples of what you think, or anyone thinks, is a harm of a birth tourist, of someone who simply comes here just for the to get a child given citizenship, and that's the only reason they come, is so that their child can be American.
I think it does stop us from. I forget. God, I think there, as far as people who are on visas and have children here. I know at one point it goes back and forth. Like whether like they take more in taxes or get more in taxes. I think historically it kind of goes one way or the other. Um, but I would also say that there is a level of um, how much can we do for the people here? So the more children we have here, the more people who are, at least possibly, and it has to happen in the future, are taking more than they give. And not like they're being bad people; they just take more welfare than they give out, or more taxes than they give out. Uh, are we being kept from perhaps providing more benefits to people, more things, et cetera, that we couldn't otherwise? You see what I'm saying? Like, is there more that we could do for
I
people?
think
Than what we're
might
doing?
be a situation, or I can imagine a world where that becomes the case, but it
Mhm.
is not the case now. The limiting factor in where and how much we can help our citizens isn't uh birthright citizenship. That's not the legal. That's not creating a situation where we are running out of resources in order to help these people or help our own people, right? Um Once again, it's actually solving that resource problem, because one of the resources we're lacking is manpower.
The manpower doesn't, when we have shown the manpower does not come up until much later. You know, you would like,
As you said,
that's,
though, it's an investment.
it is that's an investment in the future. Okay, so with when making that investment, wouldn't it be the case if you had a system where it did require some amount of the parents being there for a certain amount of time? Wouldn't wouldn't that increase the likelihood that they are going to be part of the system long term? You know, uh,
I
there'd
don't
be more of an
know if it
incentive to
would or
do
not,
that.
honestly. I mean, I can imagine a world it might, but here's the thing, like American citizens tend to want to interact and be a part of America. And this is because we are a very attractive nation to work in, to be in, to um, uh, be a citizen of. So I don't see a lot of these um, anchor babies, if you want to call them that, right? Like, or these tourist babies, whatever you want to call them. I don't see them when they get older renouncing their citizenship in huge numbers. I just don't see that. We don't see that. What we do see is them coming back to America and contributing in various ways. Uh, yeah, I mean, not all of them, obviously, right? Like, just not like all uh, jus sanguinis babies, right? The by blood babies are contributing to America. But, I mean, it is what it is.
I will say, to make kind of a um, maybe an edgier point, you know, that there are some people I would like to deport that are American citizens. Actually,
You
and
can't, though.
so
We don't allow
you
that.
can't, right? So like, you can see a situation where somebody again who's like, is born here, technically lives somewhere else for years and years and years, comes back and like starts trying to like do things that are like manifestly un-American. You know, I don't know. Like maybe there should be grounds to deport those people. A little bit. Like maybe citizenship shouldn't be
See,
so hard to
like
lose.
this is the only like this is I think your strongest point because it appeals to my kind of vindictive nature, which is a bad thing, but it does. And it's like, well, you know what? If you change what it means to be an American citizen as defined in the Constitution under the 14th Amendment, then you open the door to further changes. And what you start, that Pandora's box you opened, that fire you start, you ain't going to control who gets burned. And I can imagine easily a scenario where Democrats once again get power after they have successfully repealed the 14th Amendment or used the courts to not even amended it, right? But used the courts to kind of bypass the 14th Amendment, to further using the courts to further bypassing that amendment and other amendments in ways that Republicans and conservatives and MAGA will hate. And so,
Right.
yes, I mean, if you guys want to play the game, I'm looking at the clock, right? I'm looking at the scoreboard and I'm seeing the blue wave that's coming in 2026 and 2028, right? And I'm saying you guys want to start changing this now when you're about to lose power? Is this when you want to do this? Okay. Like part of me is tempted to just let them and say, "Okay, bitch, now we're playing. You've started the game, but we're going to finish it." But that'd be a shit show for everyone involved. It would just be bad for this country.
Like
And
imagine,
so
okay,
yeah.
so imagine this. Like after what was it? Tucker Carlson went to the bread lines in Russia. What if you could just be like, you know what? Clearly, you have no allegiance to America. Fucking get out of here. We're deporting you back to Russia, Mr.
Yeah, that's what
Carlson.
we would
Like,
say. We'd say, Tim Pool, you obviously do not have allegiance to America. Goodbye. Right? Hegseth, not allegiance to America. You're not under
really.
jurisdiction. Bye
Yeah.
bye. Right? We could absolutely do that.
And other European countries do that, right? Like, there's been arguments that like people who are, supporting Hamas, like in the UK, for example, like they could be like, you just fuck you, you're out of
Yeah,
here.
I
Like
mean
there
that's
is,
that's the
yeah.
that's the thing. It would create chaos and in a way that would not benefit America.
Can you give me your argument for, because we're kind of like going around the edges too, and I think like, well, one of the things is it's like I don't think that countries who have don't have birthright citizenship, like it's not like a hellhole, you know. I don't think it's this horrible kind of thing. Can you give me like, could you give me the kind of the positives of birthright citizenship? You
Yeah,
know, can you give me the negatives without it? Like, let's say that we go to a model that's more like European, for example. You know, let's say that we did that. What do you think like the biggest issues that we would face
sure. And what
are
it
in that
does,
kind of
first of
scenario?
all, it would disincentivize assimilation, right? We can see that between when Germany passed its law for birthright citizenship, what it looked like before, what would look like after. And before they had birthright citizenship, assimilation was way down. After it, it did rise. And so if we were to get rid of birthright citizenship and create this kind of like second class of people within our borders, right? That through no fault of their own, they don't choose where they were born, have limited
Mhm.
protection under the law, it's going to create a lot of problems, right? And we're going to have a lot of this kind of disaffected, almost stateless kind of people, right? Because again, there are like who takes these people? If you are a refugee and you're fleeing for your life and you've been exiled from your country and you come here and you have a baby, is that baby now a citizen of that other country? Not necessarily. And so what you've done is you've created a stateless person. And traditionally, stateless people are the easiest to be manipulated by terror groups and others. And that is a big risk with ending birthright citizenship because, again, other countries don't have to accept them as citizens. Why would they?
That I'm gonna say I think that that is your so far your most compelling argument, and I think you could take that back to nobody likes World War II. You can, you know, you can take that back to, hey, you know, we're trying to like deport the Jews. We're not going to accept you. These other countries. That was maybe one of the great sins of America, honestly, and other countries, and it ended horribly. Like that, obviously so. That is a very strong argument. I would say what I would ask, you know, isn't there with these situations, isn't there a problem with having within families themselves having the a two-tiered class within a family, having a parent who is under threat and the child not being under threat, and having this division within households,
Yeah,
you
well,
know, which is the system we have now.
yeah, our system now, like our deportation system, right, does have ways to address that and deal with that. We tend to send the kids off with the parents. Like that tends to be the case. Does it
We're
create
arguing that
some?
we don't want to do that anymore. That's another thing too. That's that they are had this is coming up, and I don't know if there's a constitutional bulwark. I don't think there is against, you know, separating mothers from their children. We
There
do
isn't a
now because we
constitutional bulwark against that.
there's not, and there's a real danger there, I
I
think.
mean, well, this is a thing that goes back and forth. However,
Hmm.
as citizens, these children have protections and rights that we are obliged to give them. That if they were not citizens and we were just deporting them willy nilly, that they would not. So while there is a tension by having their parents not be citizens and they're being citizens, I don't think it's an unresolvable or even hard to resolve tension. In fact, we've been doing it for what, 50 years, 60 years, some crazy
Yeah.
amounts, right? When did we start really cracking down on immigration? I forget. Right, but
I mean, depending on how you look at it, I mean, yeah, but
yeah,
I know
yeah.
what you
Just real
mean.
quick, $2 from D's nuts to say why not grant
Okay,
citizenship to
dude.
everyone? Then I think that there should be a process. Like I think that it should be an easier process than we have now. But I do think that like um keeping birthright citizenship enshrined in the Constitution is in America's best interest. Yes.
Can I? Do you mind if I use the restroom really quick and come back? I gotta pee.
No, no, no restroom. No, of course you can. Go use the restroom. I'll
Okay.
talk to the stream.
Okay. Okay.
AKA Batozai says, Wick, your Democrat utopia upholds government's ability to remove rights from people. What rights? I guess if you break the law, yes, but we tend not to allow removal of rights from people who do not break the law. Um, Is this Grassroots Hegemon? I don't think so. No, this is John. I have a link to him in the description. You can check it out. But he has a Twitter, and you can go follow his Twitter if you like. Do you guys like the you guys like the discussion so far? Are you guys having fun? Are you guys enjoying yourselves? I hope you are. Um, I know it's not like super spicy, but no polygraph. But you don't like my content at all. I don't know why you watch me, Polly. I really don't. You just don't like me. It's a bad topic. Why is it a bad topic? It's topical. I mean, people are talking about it right now. $5 from Alishness to say, if someone is here on a green card to work and gives birth, what would happen to the baby post 14th Amendment? Would their pregnancy be illegal? I don't think their pregnancy would be illegal, but would they get automatic green card status? I don't know. Good question. Oh, you can barely hear AK Batozai? Sorry. My listening library says I wish he had stronger arguments. Well, you'll have to talk to him, okay? He has this is the why like I couldn't make like a panel out of this is because he has very nuanced views that are very unique and it was really hard to get an actual panel discussion on that. Techlax says this is such BS. Just real quick, Techlax says this is such BS from Wick. There's no reason to accept illegal immigrant children in the U.S. outside of giving them health care to make sure the baby's healthy. Well, Techlax, like it's the law. It's a constitutional right. Birthright citizenship is a constitutional right. Now, if you say we shouldn't have that as a constitutional right, you're gonna have to explain to me the harm that an illegal immigrant baby does, like what it takes from you, because there is no evidence that it really takes anything that of any kind of real substance, right? We aren't going bankrupt because of illegal immigrant children, right? No one is making that argument that
We could.
I mean, there could become a day that it might be true, but it is far from the case. And in fact, we need more. Again, we're below replacement rate, and I keep repeating this. We're below replacement rate, and we need more people, actually. But aka Batozai also says, any rights whatsoever, the government can decide whether it grants those rights to people. aka Batozai, we have a constitution that guarantees rights to its citizens that cannot be infringed upon. And if you violate the constitution, you are held accountable for that. Now, you can argue that hasn't always been the case, and we've not lived up to our obligations in certain instances, but the obligation remains nonetheless. And I think that having like basic rights as put forth in the Constitution is a good thing.
Okay, so because I was kind of listening. Well, I was happening. I don't know. Would you be amenable to a situation where, and I don't know if I would be, but I'm friendly to it, where like just anybody, if you've been here for like some amount of time, let's say like 5, 10 years, whatever it might be, that like yeah, you would just get citizenship, like just across the board,
Well, that's
like
what we
a sort
did
of
in.
like
We've done that before. We've done that
like
before.
a limited Joseph.
Reagan did it. He granted
How did it
amnesty
turn
to
out?
anyone. I mean, like the country didn't get destroyed, right? Like we're
Yeah,
still here, and things are better now than they were in the 80s.
Yeah, so I don't know, like I kind of actually I'm not like unfriendly to, and that's kind of the point I've been trying to make, in my position where it's like I'm not, unfriendly to just like across the board like naturalization equals citizenship amnesty thing like that. That is something that I would consider. I think that might be a good thing actually. So I'm not unfriendly to that.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyway, so
okay, yeah, fair. I mean, but yeah, I think
yeah,
that.
so like
Go ahead.
no, and so I think that you could again apply that to families, themselves too. Like you're in America, you have a certain amount of naturalization, and then you would get retroactive sort of justly for the entire family. Like I think that in insofar as having I don't know if that would hurt as much the replacement rate, and in fact again would encourage more people to stay here, which we did. I generally we want, so
Hey, D's
also sorry
Nuts
for not having
says
like spicy reviews.
you're fine. D's Nuts says because it incentivizes human trafficking. How so?
Go
Make
on.
that argument. Elaborate, please.
For $5 more, please elaborate.
Exactly. I mean, it
Instead,
incentivizes human trafficking. I'm trying to think, like, I mean, does it?
what does?
Doesn't
I,
just like
I'm
I'm
trying to
assuming
think.
birthright citizenship, but doesn't the fact that like America is a desirable country to live in just across the board incentivize human trafficking? I guess, but I don't find that argument compelling, and I don't think that a reason to end birthright citizenship.
Yeah, I don't know how that would.
Maybe he
I
has
know
a maybe he
people.
has an argument he wants to make. I don't know. We'll find
Yeah.
out.
Um. Hmm. Okay. So, do anyone have any question? I don't know. Okay. So, other than like any sort of pressing things, and again, as far as like me, I'm trying to think if there's something I can be spicy about with this.
I mean, if
Do you? Okay. So,
there's
do you?
we've if we've circled the drain, that's fine. We can close this out if you're
No, I wonder if there's. Well, first of all, do you think there's anything that we haven't addressed? And I would be willing to, if anybody wants to, if anybody has any concerns or questions, we could try to tackle. And let's. Do you feel like there's something you haven't had, addressed, that you think is a serious problem? And two, do you think that
well.
if anybody else has a serious thing they
Here's
want to,
here's the
or
here's
not a
the
serious
here's
thing,
the here's
whatever.
the here's what I would like to find someone who's willing to come on and debate. I want someone who believes that it's not covered under the 14th Amendment. I want someone who believes that it's not constitutional and birthright citizenship is a constitutional. I would like to debate someone like that. But I haven't seen anyone willing to step up to the plate on that. I
So
also
again, my
go.
argument would be that it wouldn't necessarily, you know, absolutely, the jurisdiction argument. I think that you could make arguments for not. I don't think you would have to have a constitutional amendment there. I think you can interpret it as, again, because it wasn't foreseen there, and the way that we look at the word jurisdiction. I think you could make this sort of argument that because the language has changed, that an amendment wouldn't be necessary. So but I guess what you're kind of asking for is like somebody who thinks that it's explicitly
Well,
not
that
there, or
I mean, that's an argument that I think that we went through
I'm making the
already.
living constitution argument essentially. So
Yeah, and
what
I
are you
think
looking for
that that's
specifically?
not something that I find I apologies, but I don't think your argument there is
No.
compelling. I don't think that we can by fiat change the meaning, the intended meaning of the word subject to jurisdiction uh differently from how they interpret it back when they actually wrote the amendment. I think that it should be binding to
Do you think that
what
they
they
would have
meant and how they
foreseen?
wrote. Even if you
Do you
can't
think?
foresee every single like way that this will play out, that's why they have
Mhm.
Article 5 where you can amend the Constitution, right?
Okay, so let me. Okay, so I'm actually just curious about this. Okay, what would stop? You know, let's say you have the Republican Congress there. Because one of the things, if we declare war on a specific country, then like their children, from what I understand, that wouldn't be under birthright citizenship. Correct? Am I wrong about that?
What do you mean? Like if we declared war on Canada, obviously they're not under jurisdiction. We're at war with them. So yes, they wouldn't get.
Sure. Right. So I'm saying and not to give Republicans any ideas, but is there a world where in which we could just say, you know what, we are at war with Mexico, and therefore your children not citizens. Like, what is stopping us from doing that now?
I don't think hold on, just because we are at war with another country doesn't make their citizens who happen to live here, right? Um if they have a child, I don't think that exempts them because they're not an invading army, right? They're not soldiers with guns.
That's the kind of the point that's trying to that I've seen be made a few different ways in this sort of the Trumpian language is that like we are considering the Mexicans coming over here and having kids, that we are considering them invaders,
Okay.
and I would
I
make that
know they use
argument,
that
but
language, but that's not what invading means in any sense of the term, right? Because again, they're not soldiers with guns trying to take things from you, right? They're not trying
Mhm.
to take territory. They're not trying to do any of that. They're just living here.
Do you think that there's no path where they could try to make that argument,
They could try
uh,
to make that argument, but I think it falls flat. I don't think that it is under like they didn't understand the gypsies and the Chinese to be an invading army back when they wrote the 14th Amendment, right? And they addressed that in the debate where one of the senators who voted against the bill or the amendment voted against it specifically because it would grant citizenship to the children of people who quote unquote owe no allegiance to the United States. And he was worried that he wouldn't be able to kick him out of his state of Pennsylvania, right? Um, he understood that it would just grant citizenship to even these people. So that's not what, like, simply having immigrants here and people here, even a mass of them, right, would not be
mhm.
sufficient to count as an invading army.
What do you think that as far as like what is owed to if you're an American citizen, what do you think an American owes to his or her country? Like,
Legally or
do you think there's
morally?
well, I'd say prospectively, like where would you like to see us legally? Like, for example, I've been thinking about this, in other countries, it's like Australia is like this. I'll bring up Australia again. There is, and it could be other countries too, but they actually have like you have to vote, for example. There is I think maybe you can get out of it, but you have to vote. Would you
Mandatory voting? I'd be against mandatory voting.
mandatory voting, things like that? Do you think that
Yeah,
there's
I'm against like making these obligations under law, under the threat of force that you have to vote or you can't even abstain from voting because if you do, you would be violating the law. I don't think, while I think everyone should vote, I am against putting the force of law into a lot of things. There are a lot of things that I think people should do, right? I also like a lot of behaviors that they should abide by that I wouldn't want the force of law to be hanging over, right? I think people should serve in the military. I do. I think everyone should either serve in the military or go on like a service mission type of thing, Greenpeace, whatever, or even just do something internally, right, in the country. I think everyone should take a portion of their lives and dedicate it to civil service of some sort. But I wouldn't want that to be an enforced thing by law.
Is there anything you'd want enforced as far as like
Yes. I mean, obviously, obedience to the laws of the land that we do have, right? No murdering, no stealing, no etc. As for compulsion, I think people
yeah,
should, uh, with their children especially, should ensure that their children are educated, fed, etc. I do want the force of law applied to that. I also want the force of law applied to things like taxation and that's probably it.
Okay, and I wanted to bring up too, as far as like interpretation of language and things like that, that there are other cases. Like I think it's this is I believe 14th Amendment later. It's equal protection clause, right? For example, right? And you, you follow me? Sorry, you're kind of looking at me like
No, I'm. So go ahead.
Sorry. Okay, so like the equal protection clause, for example, and
Okay.
we from that we derive like civil rights. We derive like separation or like equal rights for the sexes, things like that. But there are these sort of dispensations that we have made. Like we look at like, and I think that the trans woman should be in the women's bathroom, all that case. But I don't think anyone's like strongly made the argument that it would be unconstitutional for men to or for trans women to be in or not be allowed in the women's bathroom or having like divisions in schools and things like that. So like we can make arguments that there are these kind of carve outs for various reasons, even if it's like not part of the strict language. You see what I'm saying? That we do make these nuanced decisions with the Constitution, even within the same amendment.
Unless those amendments are specific, like we don't have like there are hardly any carve outs to like the First Amendment, for example. Like it's pretty clear. So if you fall under the jurisdiction of the First Amendment or fall under its venue, I guess, for lack of a better term, we don't make exceptions for that generally. There's only a couple. So what do you mean? Is what I'm trying to ask, right?
I'm saying that we carve out, even if it's in kind of in clear language, we do carve out sort of exceptions for various reasons, for various things. If there's these compelling things, is kind of what I'm saying. And so it wouldn't be unheard of to make out these carve out things. And again, I want to back to like a main point I have, and it's like what you're trying to do, I think, ultimately, or not you specifically, but you, is you are trying to go against democracy in a way. You're saying that you're limiting the democratic will.
Yes, I would limit the democratic will to do certain things.
Extremely strong argument to do so. So that, I guess, has been my main point throughout, is that you are circumventing the democratic will, and I think you have to have a very good reason to
well, I think
do
that
so.
Our whole system is designed in certain cases to circumvent democratic will. That's the whole point of the amendment system. The Bill of Rights is circumventing the democratic will to be able to punish you for your speech, to be able to punish you for owning a gun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And we can go through them. Like, we do not allow the will of the people to say, you know what? In this case, I want there to be cruel and unusual punishment because I hate this person, right? Like, we don't allow that. We circumvent democratic will in these cases. And that is what I'm arguing for. In the case of birthright citizenship is a constitutionally guaranteed right that I do not think that the democratic will should be able to subvert unless, and only in one situation, they go through the amendment process. And there's a whole process to doing that that's laid out in the Constitution, right? Where you got a constitutional Congress, you make the amendment, you pass the amendment, etc. But it's a different process than just voting, right?
Mm-hmm. Let me use the restroom again real quick, and then maybe you want to do like another like 10, 15
we're gonna wrap up. I have a couple callers, right? That I saw backstage. I don't know if they're still there, but
yeah, can I use the restroom and I can like maybe I'll comment on whoever's calling in or whatever. Yeah.
Go.
I'll be right back.
Hello, you're live.
Okay. Okay.
What's up, Deej?
Oh, what's up? Sorry, I'm camera off today. I just wanted to reinforce the point that I made about the incentivization of human trafficking. So one of the things that was a major concern in South American countries, especially during the Biden administration, was the demographics of people that were traveling through South America to get to the U.S. border, which included, you watched.
You're breaking up a little bit. Can I don't know
live streams. Hold on, one sec.
Yeah.
Is this better?
All right, we'll find out. Keep going.
Testing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, during the Biden administration, especially, there was a large influx of people that were coming to the U.S. border, obviously, but there was also a large number of pregnant women who were making the extremely dangerous journey to get to the U.S. And part of the reason for that, and the reason why we have birthright or anchor babies birth, is because when you come to the U.S. and you have a child in the U.S. and you come here illegally, it makes it more difficult for you to be deported. Now, you still can But if it's a friendly administration, like Biden administration wasn't exactly deporting the parents of DACA individuals or also, just children that were born by illegal immigrants. And so you create a system where it incentivizes people to travel to the U.S. in a time of their life when they're vulnerable, because it increases the likelihood to have a U.S. child, because it's a way to circumvent the legal immigration process. And it also makes it when more people want to do it, and when more vulnerable people want to do it, coyotes and other folks that take advantage of them.
Well, here's the thing.
People to pick from.
Yeah, here's the thing. That incentives exist just to live in the United States. There's no added incentive, right? Because as you ceded to, we deported families or parents all the time. Even Obama did this, right? Obama did it, Trump did it, Biden did it, Clinton probably did it, Bush did it. It isn't necessarily like unheard of or even particularly more difficult for us to decide we're just going to deport these and separate these families, or sometimes deport the kids as well. Like we did that all the time.
There's still an incentive to get to the U.S. while you're pregnant, because if you have a child that is a U.S. citizen, it strengthens your claim as a non-U.S. citizen to be in the country, whether it's to get a green card faster or any other type of legal status. And again, like under more friendly administrations, you are more difficult to deport because it becomes a question of what happens with the child. So regardless of whether there's like, I'm not saying it's the only incentive, but it incentivizes the most vulnerable because they're the ones strongest claim as an illegal immigrant, so long as their child is delivered on the U.S. or the U.S. side of the border.
Can I try to? By the way, is he breaking up or my audio breaking up?
His audio.
I'm breaking up, I guess.
Today, yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. So the problem with that is just on a basic sense, like, okay, so imagine somebody's like, running, across the border, trying to do that. And it's like, there's a 100% chance that if they don't leave, they're going to get like shot in the face and killed by the cartel. And then there's like a 50% chance, it's lower than that, but 50% chance that they'll be sex trafficked in America. Like they're still going to like choose the better deal, even if there is that risk. Do you see what I'm saying?
But the thing is these people aren't cut like a lot of these people are not Mexican citizens scared of Mexican cartels coming to the U.S. They came through multiple South American countries. In some cases, they flew in from Africa to certain South American countries and then traveled up north to the American border. So most people that are claiming asylum don't actually have a legitimate claim asylum. Like there are obviously those individuals, right? Thing is, if you have to cross through 12 safe countries to get to the border, sorry, you're not just fleeing imminent threat and danger. You're coming here because the best place to land. I don't fault them for that, but at the same time, we have to have border enforcement because we can't just like save the world. If we save the world, we're just going to turn the U.S. into a third world country. And we're going to end up making things worse for them.
Do you think that we are currently in danger of becoming a third world country with even Biden's rates of immigration?
Not in my generation, right? But if we're talking like 4, 5, 6, 7 generations down the line, it's 100% possible. Yeah, I mean there are places in America that frankly
is it possible or is it plausible? There's a difference.
I would say it's plausible. I mean, the thing is that a lot like obviously good immigration, and I would never argue against immigration in general. I think we need more legal immigration. But you go to a lot of places where you have massive amounts of illegal immigrants that displace the native population, and you do end up with a cultural shift that dramatically changes the dynamic of what that area is like. I mean,
yeah, but one of the
language
major
differences, for
unique, I guess, traits, culture of America, I don't know exactly what to rephrase it as, but is that American culture tends towards assimilation in a way that European culture does not, right? Because of the ethnic makeup of how these other countries are built. Like they were largely founded on ethnic kind of boundaries in a lot of ways, right? America was not and is not and is a unique almost in that sense that it is not based on any kind of ethnic lineage or anything. And from our inception, it hasn't been. And I think that while that might be the case in Europe, in America, what tends to happen, because we've had hundreds of millions of immigrants into this country, right? Hundreds of millions of legal immigrants into the country over its existence. And America is just more American than ever, right? Like we tend to assimilate in a way that other countries just do not. So even with Biden levels of immigration, right? And we can quibble on what the exact rate was there, right? Like we aren't at any risk of becoming a third world or having a huge cultural shift. The biggest risk we have towards a cultural shift in America is coming from inside the house. It's coming from MAGA.
So I have to push back on that a little bit. So first off, like, yes, the U.S. has hundreds of millions of people that are descendants of immigrants. However, in the past roughly 10 years, the people that have been bringing in immigration are very different culturally. Like if you compare, like South American Mexican culture, and you compare that with Somalian culture, Mexicans integrate into the U.S. much, much better than Somalis do. And so, while yes, people can integrate, there are certain cultures that are not compatible with Americanism. And if you're someone who believes that your ticket into the U.S. is by first violating the U.S.'s laws to get in here and exploit the system, you're kind of almost self-selecting for people that are not going to assimilate because their first introduction into American culture is by violating the social contract. And so, and
I just don't see that
end up getting passed down to their children as well.
Just to be clear, right? I don't see the evidence that this is the case. Like, has America become less American in the last 10 years?
I would say that the cultural fabric of America is very different from the cultural fabric in, like, say, World War II era. And this isn't like a racial thing at all. Like, frankly, white Americans are like pretty like compared to previous generations. But like as a whole, no, I don't actually think that the like American ethos is stronger today than it was 40 years.
Can I kind of try to like
in a minute?
Say,
in a minute, and I'll let you go.
Just to add,
yeah. But I would say that yes, but the American ethos not being strong as it was 10 years ago isn't because of immigrants, and in fact is a fundamental change of American citizens and their thoughts on things and their beliefs in things, not from immigrants, not from birthright citizenships, etc., right? But from people who are trying to redefine what it means to be an American, right? Heritage Americanism. A lot of this is the greatest threat to what it means to be America, not immigration. It's MAGA.
It's multifaceted, right? But the thing is that it's like, yes, it's not like it's only illegal immigrants that are at fault for the change of American culture. Right? But the reality is when you have a demographic change in an area from bringing in hundreds of thousands to millions of people who are different from, I hate to say, use the term like native stock, they're
different. How?
They are different. Culturally, they're different.
Oh yeah, but culturally, I'm different than someone who's in California. Culturally, I'm different than someone who lives in Florida, a white guy who lives in Florida.
You are far more culturally similar to me, Wick. You're far more culturally similar to me than the Somalis that, are in the news currently right now. I mean, like something that there are cultures that literally just like take advantage of every single possible system and loophole that they can. Those people are not compatible with the American ethos, and that doesn't mean every single person from that country. But if, again, your first introduction to the United States is breaking the law and exploiting a loophole to reinforce your ability to stay here, you're probably more likely to be one of the people that's going to take advantage of the system rather than see how you can contribute to the system.
I see no evidence this is the case, and in fact, I see evidence against this. Far more on a per capita basis. Far more citizens break the law than non-citizens.
So that is only if you lump in legal non-citizen residents. If you actually just like factor out the legal non-citizen legal immigrants, let's ignore the fact that the thing they did when they came to the country was break the law. You just look at them committing other crimes not related to their immigration status. They actually have a crime rate higher than their native legal status counterpart.
Yeah, if you torture the numbers in that specific way, that might be true. But if you just take the baseline, who is more likely to commit a crime, an immigrant or a citizen? The citizen would be far more likely to be committing a crime on a per capita basis.
Can I make sure that I'm understanding you right? Saying that making a distinction between legal and illegal immigrants, twisting the number.
No, in the way that you did, you had so many different conditionals. My simple question. Hold on, just answer my question, then I'll answer yours. If you have a citizen of the United States and an immigrant, right? Whether that be legal or illegal, it does not matter, right? You have an immigrant and you have a citizen. Who is more likely to have committed a crime, the citizen or the immigrant, or to be committing a crime, the citizen or the immigrant?
Legal immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than U.S. citizens that are generationally born here. Correct. However, that is not the case for illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants commit crimes at higher rates than native-born citizens and also legal residents.
Where's the data on that?
I will provide it to you later,
Please
but
do.
I am saying with 100% certainty that illegal immigrants, again, ignoring them simply being here, is against the law. They do commit crimes at higher rates than native citizens. I'll send that to you.
So you can go. But I'm just fact checking this.
No,
because initially, like from September 12th, 2024, I'm looking at this. Yeah, undocumented immigrant offending rate is lower than U.S.-born citizen rate, and this is based on a study from 2012 to 2018. So yeah, you're gonna have to provide me that data because I'm looking quick Google.
I'll provide you that data. There's also, a lot of the sources are anyway.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to think. So it isn't necessarily the case, and I see like the character test, for lack of a better way, that you're kind of trying to put here. I think that like the bigger issue is that like with the fabric of America kind of thing, that like that's something that would be ameliorated by, at least potentially, by conditional citizenship, essentially of one's children. Is like one of the issues we have is language, for example, like whether or not a person's committing a crime or not. Like, okay, that's kind of we can argue back and forth about that. There is a situation where there are areas, especially in the South, things like that, where there are cities, towns, places where people are in their separate enclaves because they do not speak the language, because they haven't had the incentive to speak the language, because they have all these, the English language, sorry, but we don't have an official language, but the English language. So there is a separation of cultures there. And one of the problems with the crime rate, it's hard to get, because on paper, you're correct, Wick, that it is true that the people who are not citizens here are here, immigrants here. I think it's illegal, or whether or not, is that on paper they do commit less crime. However, the problem is that because they are in these sort of enclave areas, they're kind of ghettoized in a certain way, that reporting is really, really hard to get a number on. There are a lot of people who do not report to the police. They do not they are insular in a way that it's hard to actually get data on how much crime is being committed one way or another.
That too, yeah.
That's one of the main issues.
So reporting reporting issues aside, I mean, I'll just cede to that.
It's huge reporting issues. Like it's not
but
just a
you
little
don't
bit.
know.
Like,
this
it's
is a
enormous.
problem. Like you're introducing a variable that you can't really measure or account for. You can say it's a huge reporting issue, but is it? How do we measure that?
Yes, and I think that the
does the data that you were looking at, are there any anything that's broken down by demographics beyond just legal status? Because Americans don't commit crime at the same rate, so I wonder actually if
they break it into three categories: U.S. born citizen, documented immigrant, and undocumented immigrant. And the undocumented immigrant arrests rates per 100,000 persons is far, far lower than either of the other two categories. Documented immigrants commit crimes lower than U.S. born citizens. Undocumented immigrants commit lower crimes rates at lower than U.S. born and documented. So,
wait, lower than documented
yes,
as well?
Undocumented immigrants commit
I don't. I'm going to have to see those sources then, because that has to be a reporting error. That just doesn't. Like,
and again, and so that is partly because they are in insular communities here, where because unless you want to make and you could so the other side of it is that you could make the case that a reason why they might commit less crimes is because they are afraid of being deported if they do, right? Would that
and this
make
is
sense?
These stats, just be clear, are from the Department of Justice, and they were compiled on the 22nd of January, 2025. So under the Trump administration, I'm just giving you the numbers from the Department of Justice.
No, and I'm asking you, like, let's say those numbers are true, like, and I would say that it may be a very plausible causation of that is because there's the threat of deportations, right? You know, if they are caught doing a thing, so you kind of like ride the straight and narrow. So if it is easier, perhaps to be deported, to have all these issues, would we not see a possibility that there would be a lowering in crime rate? Simply because there is more threat there in the first place.
Can you recontextualize that for me? Can you repeat it? Sorry, I was doing a couple things.
Okay, so let's say let's agree. Just hypothetically, I know the person below me, D's. Is that who was this? Sorry, D, whatever your name is. Yeah. So that, but let's just, for the sake of the argument, agree that undocumented immigrants commit less crime, right, than the native population and everybody else, right? And so we have to think about, like, what is the reason for that? And it's very plausible to me that the reason for that is there are these threats of deportation. There are those things there. And so would it not be possible, possible to say that if we have this, that we could see if that's more there, if that threat is more there, that we could see a lowering of crime rate there. You see what I'm saying? Like, because there's that threat over there.
Well, let's look at overall crime in general. So we have, again, and maybe you would disagree with this, Deej, but immigration rates have risen in the last, let's say, 20 years. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. But in the last 20 years, we've seen a marked decrease in crime overall in this country.
Well, yeah, because we were at, like, literally the highest levels in history in the 90s. So,
well, yes.
You have to look, like, relative to when, right?
Okay. So we know from this that even spiking immigration rates don't necessarily increase crime, because we've seen a decrease in crime. Now, I'm not saying that more immigrants means less crime, right? That's not the correlation I'm making here. What I am saying is that the statement that the more immigrants we have, the more crime we will have, seems to be false by the numbers.
Well, I didn't specifically make the claim that it was we would have more crime. It's that they would integrate into society, like they're less of a cultural fit, and that they don't follow the
cultural in what way, right? Like, so what? The idea of American culture.
Here's an example, right? When you're at an amusement park, right, we have this cultural acceptance that regardless of how long the line is, you don't just step in front of someone.
That's not true. I have seen plenty of people, white people, U.S. citizens.
Well, you shouldn't.
No, you shouldn't, but they do this.
Condemn them, and the thing is, right, is that that's functionally like the type of person that would come to the U.S. illegally.
they're functionally doing the exact same thing, right? And so we consider people in line to not match the ethos of what we think America should be. And you have individuals who, the very first interaction they have with the country is functionally doing that. They're violating the social contract.
Hold on. We are having a debate in this country on immigration and whether or not we even want immigration to this country, let alone how we should view illegal immigrants.
No.
Okay,
because
so
a lot, just real quick, hold on, just a lot. Let me finish, please. A lot of the people that MAGA is calling illegal are actually legal immigrants who came here through the systems that Biden and others put in place that were entirely legal, right? And I know you're not MAGA. I understand that. And neither of you are MAGA. I get that, right? But this idea that we have this shared cultural view of what immigrants should be in America is wrong. We do not. We are currently fighting about that as a culture in America, where U.S. citizens, by birth, by blood, whatever you want to call them, are having an argument among ourselves about what we think of immigrants. And it's not a settled question.
Look, really quickly, I want to make a point because I think it's important. And it's just, I think that there's a kind of a logical flaw in the thing that you said. And you said that because we don't see a rise in crime, that it necessarily isn't the case that illegal immigrants are driving up crime rates, and it's kind of an heuristic point, but I would say that it is possible to have something that increases something where so let's say that we could have a situation where they are still increasing the crime rate, but there are 5 or 6 other things that are decreasing the crime rate, and the overall
that's possible.
thing is still the crime rate.
I'll concede to that that's possible, but with the additional information that we have, that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at less rate than documented immigrants or citizens, then I could say there's no evidence that this is the case, right?
So there is evidence. I'm not in front of my computer, and I know the sources that you're citing. I just don't have the refutations fully memorized.
Okay.
But very much is like how, people will manipulate crime statistics in communities that do underreport. Like they'll say that reported crime is down, but if you look at homicide numbers, the homicide numbers could be because when you're
if you look at a specific crime stat, you can say that specific stat is up. It's like people who saying the economy is bad because egg prices are increased, but every other economic indicator shows
not totally. If you have a situation where you have 2 types of crimes, right? Crime is only logged as a crime because it's reported, and another crime is logged because there's a dead body. The dead body crime, your stats on that are going to be far more accurate than reported, because you can just experience reporting bias because people don't want to pour on their neighbors to the police. They're afraid that they could be
which is the point I was making, you would have to look at things like, are there bodies, something like that. One of the things we can look at is like property damage, for example, that in areas with a lot of undocumented immigrants, you have a lot more instances of property damage. So there's some
property damage still has to be logged. Like you have to call the police and file a complaint for property damage to be logged.
Right, but as far as there are issues where there are signs necessarily, there could be signs of there being issues with crime specifically. And again, one of the things you want to talk about too is what crimes are we talking about here? So that's another overall thing. I remember the point that was made that go ahead. Sorry, you can just to finish really quickly. One can make the argument that one of the arguments that's made is undocumented immigrants are actually paying in taxes, but they're not getting anything out of it, blah, blah, blah. But that in and of itself, that's a crime. You could make that case of what crimes are we referring to specifically? Because that's an issue,
Well, and also, for instance, there's a lot of times where there are crimes that you don't find out about until years later, with the Somali scandal that's going on in Minnesota, right? You're talking about systemic problem with refugees abusing the Medicaid system, taking advantage of the taxpayer.
Yeah, but we have a much bigger problem currently in the White House that's doing more fraud and corruption than Somalians could even fucking dream.
Just okay, Trump bad. I agree, Trump bad.
Okay, but here's the point of me saying that. Hold on, stop. The point of me saying that is you blaming all of Somalians for what a couple Somalians did would be bringing like America's just a corrupt country because Trump did something.
Okay, wait, it wasn't just a couple of Somalians. Every single Somalian that went along with the scheme is complicit in it. It wasn't just the people that were charged and the businesses that were involved. It's every single one of their customers. You're talking millions of dollars.
Why are every single one of those specific customers complicit? Even the white ones, or is it only the Somalian ones?
They weren't rendered actual services. It was fraud. They actually rendered in-house services. They were given money to claim their child had autism, that they could get in-house medical services that were never rendered by Medicaid.
So fraud was committed against them.
No, they were given money to go along with the scheme.
Say it one more time, you cut out at the end.
They were given money to go along with the scheme. It's like, I have a child, someone comes to me and says, hey, we can get your child diagnosed as having autism and charge you, $100,000 a year for
sure, how many people we're talking about?
Autism services. Enough that it was over $500 million in fraud.
Okay, how many people are we talking about?
At least 1,000.
At least 1,000. Okay. How many Somalian immigrants are in the United States?
Well, in Minnesota, it's a very densely concentrated population of Somalians in that area. Enough that they were able to go on with this for years without it being figured out.
Okay, so Somalian descent is about 108,000. So 1%. 1%.
Yeah, I see 100,000 people of Somali descent in Minnesota specifically.
Yeah, so even if we take your number, right, you have 1%.
I said thousands, not 8,000, but even I don't think 1% of Americans would go along with that scheme for several years without reporting it.
When we are talking about this thing, Wick, I want to, just to kind of, and I obviously might disagree with both of you, but
just real quick, approximately 77 million, or 1 in every 3 adults in America, has a criminal record.
1 in 3. Wow.
Okay, so this idea that Americans wouldn't commit crime at 1% rate, we're doing it at a 33% rate, motherfucker.
No one is making that argument.
You are making that argument, though, that Somalian culture is particularly perfidious and used to doing crime at a rate that American culture is not. And we look at the numbers and we say 1%, by your numbers, of Somalians were committing a crime or this specific crime. And then we look at how many Americans commit crime. 33% of adults.
If you can find 1% of Americans would go for several years, getting their children falsely diagnosed with autism and receiving thousands of dollars in return for tens of thousands of Medicaid dollars funding fake in-house services, I will concede you that point. I don't think you can find 1% of Americans that would do that without immediately reporting it to the IRS.
Hold on. If I can find 1% of Americans that commit tax fraud, would you cede to me?
Well, nobody does.
It's totally different.
Oh, it's totally different. This is why I don't take your argument seriously, is because I can look at corruption and fraud in one group, and you say it's like this is their culture, and then I can point to you corruption and fraud in our group, and you're like, well, that's totally understandable and it's different.
Americans have a culture trying to reduce the amount of taxes they have to pay. I 100% agree with you. What they don't have is a culture. Well, I mean, there are obviously some Americans that do that, but I don't think you could randomly select 1% of the U.S. population, or even repeatedly select.
You could
1%. Yeah, not for several years.
So so really quickly, I want to make a case as far as them being culturally different, things like that. I think that's but I would say, okay, so I don't know if either one of you have children, right? But if you, I don't know either. But if you have a child, my presumption is that if your child starts breaking shit in the house, you chastise them, whatever, but they are your child. They live in your house, and therefore, there's only so many things you can do. You still sure. But if somebody like the neighbor kid comes over your fucking house and starts breaking shit, et cetera, then like you don't have the same allegiance to them. You don't have the same thing going on there, and you kick them the fuck out of the house. So there is like even I'm not even saying there has to be a cultural difference there between the two people. I think it's fundamentally different if somebody's coming into the country and commits crimes versus somebody here because there's different kind of fealty we have with each other.
I do agree that non-citizens should have less protections than citizens. I'll just cede to that, right? And I think that we should be able to deport non-citizens that engage in crime. I think that's
what about non-citizens that don't engage in active crime?
I think I should say
they never got a green card. They never went through the legal process. They just crossed the border. And then they skipped their
they committed no other crime, and they're contributing to the United States, and let them in. Yeah, keep them in. I think that's fine.
Let's say, okay, would you say that ultimately, would you...
Hold on, what's the harm to that? Just real quick. Do you disagree with that, Deej? What's the harm?
So first, the harm is that you don't know who they are. They're undocumented, which means it's harder for them to integrate into society. You do end up with a second-class persons situation, like you had mentioned. Where
but the solution to that would be like, get them documented. Like, I think that would be the path, right?
But then
encourage that.
If you tell people that, hey, if you come to the U.S. illegally, we're going to immediately give you a green card. How do you think the number one way that people in some South African hellhole are going to come to the America?
You're breaking up again. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
South Africa. Oh, damn, dude.
So if we made it policy where if you come to the U.S. illegally, you cross the southern border and you don't commit any crimes other than that, right? And we give you legal status. We give you a green card when you do that. Do you think is going to be a message sent to everyone in the world that doesn't have the to come to the U.S. through the legal, has the means to be able to buy a plane ticket to some South American country and then walk the rest of the way to the U.S. border?
Okay, so
do you think this is a Somalian thing specifically, or do you think it's just anybody who?
This isn't just Somalians. Like the thing is most of Somalians are refugees. They actually came here through the legal process, right?
Or do you think they're like specific like bad cultures, like not like with somebody who's immigrating from from some culture that you do like, do you have less of a problem with that than like somebody from Somalia or another country? Is there a cultural issue?
It's very country specific, right? So like for instance, I would be a lot more amicable to a Turkish person moving in to be my neighbor than I would someone from Afghanistan. Right?
Would you be So my problem with what you just said there is that like it seemed to be your initial thing, which I actually am more amenable to, is this idea that somebody who's like crossing over several states in order to be in the country is shown like poor character and is more likely to do bad things. But then you're kind of switching to like, well, it's specific cultures from specific countries that are the problem. So like that seems to be a bit of a conflict
hold on.
there.
There are two arguments that I have to make in response.
They kind of seem in contradiction, but if you want to
I do want to say that this is going on longer than I expected. So, gang, if you want this to continue to go on, you're going to give me money. So if we can get about $50, we'll keep going to the end of the hour. But if not, I'm just going to shut it down. But go ahead, please.
So there's two separate arguments. Is that all illegal immigration is bad, and we should have a zero tolerance policy. Come to the country illegally. I don't care if you're coming from North Ireland or Italy, right? You should get deported the second that you're caught. We should not tolerate illegal immigration.
Would you say that if they've been there for like 10 years, would you be like, hey, motherfucker, you didn't you missed your court date or whatever, like get the fuck out of the country? Or would there be like some kind of statute of limitations on that? How would you figure that out?
Okay, if there was a legal process that they followed and it took 10 years to get through the process, then that's fine. But like if you...
Let's say illegal. Let's say they were undetected for 10 years. Let's say they're undetected for 10 years.
Just to be clear, we have law on this. The statute of limitations for illegal entry is 5 years. So that's the cutoff that America has decided.
So yeah, okay. So do you think that's a good cutoff, or do you think that's like? Do you agree with that policy?
Okay, hold on. What's the status of this? Is this they entered the country illegally first, or they just had like green cards expired.
I don't know the
they-
specifics. Just the statute of limitations
Well,
for illegal entry is 5 years. So
No, well, I mean, it's an ongoing crime if you're in the country illegally to start with, so you could still be deported.
no, there's no
Do
being
you think they
present without
should still be
status is not a
deported?
crime.
Do you think after 5 years?
No,
they
because
find
the
it-
thing.
Just no, that's just the law. Being present without status is not a crime. That's why deportation
with
is
that
not a
law?
punishment.
Well, deportation isn't a punishment either, so technically.
No, that's why. That's
You
why
still-
they
you
can
can-
deport them
Okay, I crossed
because
the southern border.
it's not a
I
punishment.
crossed the southern
even
border
though they
illegally,
Hmm,
and I'm
say
here
one
for
more time?
5 years. I can still be deported.
If you cross the border illegally, okay, the statute of limitations on that being a crime is 5 years. Simply being
No, because
present without status in this country is not a crime. The crime is hopping the border. The crime isn't being here without a green
I don't
card.
believe that is true, but
Okay, well,
regardless, I
but-
say it ought not be true. Well, we'll just go with my.
okay, if you think it ought not to be true, that's fair, right? But
Okay, so the first is we should have a zero tolerance policy to illegal immigration. The second is we should have more lax immigration for designated groups. So, like for
What
instance,
designated group?
it
the white
would be
ones.
dependent. Oh, examples would be like Filipino, Indian, Japanese. Heck, I even use like as an example. Like there are and tons
Oh,
of
this
great,
is so hard because
like,
you're breaking up
cultures in
all the
the
time,
world.
buddy. Right? This
You
is
can make
really
an argument for. I think you can make an argument, for example, and I don't know if you'd be amenable to this, Deej, that where if America, like we talk about the Philippines, for example, Philippines were an American territory back in the day, you know, and then we could make arguments for if we are occupying a country in some way or another, if we are using them, if we have some sort of like thing going on with them, you know, especially any kind of occupation, that we do kind of would owe them like a larger, okay, what's the word, like okayness, there's a better word for this, but like for immigration, does that make sense to you, or do you disagree with that kind of assessment?
No, I totally agree with that. Like for instance, all the Afghan brought in, like should have brought in more Afghanis, especially those that did like assist us in what we were doing in their country. Like the thing is I don't have a list offhand of the countries that are acceptable, and these are the ones that.
What is the perimeter, I guess, is what I'm trying to figure out. I don't even know if I agree with you or not, because I don't know what the perimeter of like allowing people in would be or not.
It's based off the strategic needs of the U.S.
That's not. Yeah, sure.
okay. The
but, like,
strategic needs of the
specifically?
U.S. How would one country fulfill it and one country not?
Well, so for one,
Let's use
like,
Britain and Afghanistan, okay? Because you mentioned Britain and you mentioned Afghanistan. How does a British immigrant fulfill the needs, the national strategic needs of the U.S., but an Afghan immigrant does not fulfill that need?
Well, can we not use the British because I don't like the British.
Fuck
Like,
the British.
Canadian. Let's
yeah,
use
right?
Canadian. I don't care. Like pick a
What
pick a.
hey, they bowed down to the crown instead of resisting it with
Oh my
us.
God.
So
You're not.
don't let them down here either.
What do you want to use?
here's
French,
the thing,
German? I'd like pick a country. Okay.
Okay, we all right. We can use again. Let's say Turkey and Afghanistan, since those are cultures that are kind of like grew up in the same region, but are very, very in
So
practice for how
Hassan
the people live from a day
versus
to day.
another person. Okay.
Yeah, like as bad as I think Hassan is, right? I don't think that he's worse than a lot of
An
people
average
in
Somali.
Afghanistan,
Oh, okay.
and then the average Somali. Like
The
think-
average Minnesota Somali.
it
Worse than
doesn't
Hassan.
everyone in the culture, right? Like there are people that are going to be more beneficial to come to the West than others. And we can have policy that
Sure.
restrict and increase the number of ones that will be a net
I agree
to
that
those that will be a net negative.
I will agree with you that there are immigrants who are better for the U.S. and there are immigrants who are worse. But I wouldn't fit the dividing line by country of origin. I would put the dividing line on merit alone.
Well, then let's go completely on a merit
H-1B
basis,
visas is a good example, right?
I am in a favor of the H-1B visa.
Yes. Like, a lot of people aren't, but I think that having a meritocratic system where we brain drain other countries is in our interest, where we want people who are the best and the brightest from all over the world to come here. So I wouldn't put the dividing line on that for country. I would simply put the dividing line on, like, hey, if you want to cut the line, if you want to be an American citizen, it's not money. Just demonstrate your worth, right? Demonstrate your worth. Showcase that you're a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever, right? Whatever we decide. And then you can get in this country and we can let you skip the line. We'll expedite the process. I'm absolutely fine with that.
I am 100% on board with that.
Yes.
In fact, I would extend that to then the logical conclusion of that as well, which is by your own merit, show a willingness to the line to come here.
I can't hear you, man.
Like disqualified from that pool for a certain amount of time, whether it's like 1 year you send you back for 1 year, you can apply. Again after the year.
I'm not. You broke up too much. I don't know what you said. But we do have to go. Unfortunately, no one gave me any money, and that's on you.
Sorry.
Okay, it's fine. But I want to give you a chance to Mr. John here. I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find you, closing thoughts on the issue, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought this conversation was okay. So I'm John. I think it's the John Paul Hyde. I think it'll be in your description on Twitter if you want to follow me. I thought this was an interesting conversation. I'm sorry it didn't get like super contentious. I think it almost did maybe, but like I'm interested in what's going to be in democracy. I'm interested in kind of I like immigration. I like all those things. And I kind of wanted to bring a side of things that were at least a little different than maybe what you've seen, Wick, and what other people have seen on as far as these arguments go. And I hope I succeeded in that. And I had a good time. I thank you for having me on. So that's about it.
Thanks for coming, and I do appreciate you, gang. Give him a follow on X. I got a link to his description in my YouTube. So just click on that link and give him that subscription. What do we got coming up? So first of all, if you've enjoyed this content, if you like this content, please support the show, support the channel, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're following this on Twitch, hit the follow button. Throw me some... they all left. Okay, whatever. Throw me some gift subs, all of that, right? Really helps the channel. Super chats help the channel, keeps the lights on. It is Christmas coming up, and I would like to get some good Christmas presents for my family and friends. So if you can support, please support. It would be appreciated. We got some great content coming up. Tomorrow, for example, we're going to be having on Stream Rift. We're going to have on Not So Erudite. We're going to have on Gen Z Attorney. And we're going to have on a new guy, right? And we're going to be talking about bias in religious bias, I should say, in higher education. We're going to be talking about the Oklahoma University girl who wrote a paper and was flunked, got a 0, right? Allegedly because of her Christian values, though there is some disagreement on that. And we will get to it tomorrow, and that should be fun. And then on Thursday, we're going to have some people to talk about the boat strikes. The legality, the morality, the necessity, or the unnecessity of it. And that should be fun, too. So tune in. Come on by. Support the channel. We love you. Goodbye.